What phase did you shock your parents by never growing out of? Skateboarding. I'm 37 and I'm still at it 27 years later. Falls hurt so much more now, probably because of the falls from 15 years ago. Still, I've never found anything that comes close to replacing it in my life. My obsession with flying. I'm working on my instrument rating now. I started playing cocktail piano music for parties at age 14 just for fun. Then I started getting paid handsomely for it with generous tips in the brandy snifter. Now I do it regularly when asked for special occasions. Listening to metal music. I pushed through my teenage years and I still love it. I'm 35 and I still listen to a lot of the heavier stuff. I grew out of the image, but not the music. Playing video games and playing bass guitar and spinning records. Mine convinced me that all of my old Magic the Gathering cards were a waste of money. I sold them all 17 years ago, and seeing their value today is disgusting. One of my friends said his father tore up his decks to get him to stop wasting his damn time, and apparently one of the cards was a Black Lotus. Listening to music all the time. I just love picking up an album, sitting my butt down and just listening to it start to finish without ever leaving my seat. Feels a lot like watching a good movie afterwards. I don't know many people that do this either. My sister did a report on the meat industry as a freshman in high school. She became a vegan as a result. She's now 32 and has been strictly vegan ever since. Yeah, it turns out that when we see the start-to-finish process up close, a lot of people just outright refuse to have anything to do with that crap. Fair enough. Not everyone, but then again, most people who work in the industry are part of one isolated process and don't see the full process from factory farm to supermarket packet. How unsocial I am. My mother was sure I'd eventually meet the right people or come out of my shell, but I quite simply don't enjoy spending time with many people. I find groups of greater than 5 a total drain of energy, and with small groups, I often get pretty bored and want to go home 2 or 3 hours after meeting up. There have been a handful of people I've met which I could really spend 24/7 with and not feel the need to leave. It's a rare thing, and weirdly, I don't really know what made them so tolerable or made me like their presence, but it does happen. It's not common enough for my mother, though. She thinks I'll end up a hermit. Not wanting kids. I've known that pretty much since the first hair grew on my Jimmy John. Everyone said I'd change my mind and grow out of it, and I never did. Me too. I find it hilarious that because they say, you'll change your mind, you also don't get to decide when you want your reproductive bits fixed. Some people might change their minds, however, some of us never will. My interest in history. My parents were against it because they didn't think that I'd ever be able to hold down a job. I worked extremely hard, earned a great degree from a top university, currently the youngest person working at a fairly prestigious job, have traveled to multiple non-Western countries, and I'm looking into great PhD programs. I never plan on not doing history. In elementary school, I was very talkative and extroverted. Good student, but always got the teachers annoyed because I'd talk to people and distract everyone. Not a class clown, just chatty. Then I got really quiet and stopped going out of my way to talk to people. I'm still introverted as F. No, I don't know what happened. My parents, mainly my stepdad, were pretty racist, and they thought that my feelings on the subject, by which I mean liking or not liking someone based only on their skin color, was wrong, would absolutely change as I got older. I'm 44, and my feelings have not changed. My glorious neck-length strawberry blonde hair. Resenting them for my weird and damaging upbringing. Looking like a homeless person. Pokemon. My parents used to tell me I'd lose interest in gaming as I grew up. That didn't happen. I don't really understand the outgrowing gaming thing. It's like it was the choice of entertainment when our generation was young, and I still play games occasionally. TV was the boomers' choice of entertainment. Before that, it was music and radio. Did all of them outgrow that? Likely not. Making things and doing crafts. Ever since I was first handed crayons and construction paper, I've been filled with the desire to create. My mum thought I was crazy a couple of years ago when I quit my corporate job and opened a shop on Etsy. It was very successful and I made a lot of money. It became a little too stressful though, so I went back to my old job. However, I trained my mum on how to run the shop, and now she's able to work from home more, which she loves. I love that she learned creativity is not just a silly hobby or waste of time. Me being single. My love of cars and trucks. How much I tickle my own pickle. My social anxiety. That I didn't want children. It's been 26 years since I made that assertion, and that I thought religion was stupid. She isn't a grandmother, and I'm not suddenly a practicing Jew. The whole lesbian thing. This was submitted by user Scottish Lesbian. Oh, good thing the Scottish part was just a phase, right? Right? Fortunately, they're not out of their phase on that one either. Biting my nails. I was born brain damaged. I also have ADHD and OCD. But here's the tragic part. I don't look disabled at all. I look very normal at first glance. My parents were confused when I couldn't do math well and had trouble, huge trouble with tasks such as setting the table and cleaning. They thought, the kid is just pretending to be stupid to mess with us. This is all just a long con to get out of chores. I'd also often fall while biking or roller skating. They got angry with me and told me to quit being so careless. I'm 27 and they still think I'm just messing with them. Normal people just don't get it. They just don't. Their attitude is, what do you mean you can't set the table? How is that even possible? It is possible. It's absolutely possible. They say, a 4-year-old could do this, so obviously someone who's 27 could too. No, he or she couldn't. Maybe it's counterintuitive to you. That doesn't stop it from being 100% true. The fact that your parents can be this deep in denial when you've presumably told them that you have been diagnosed as these things is both breathtaking and deeply tragic. They'd be happier if they accepted it, in all likelihood. Having piercings and tattoos on my body. I have facial piercings that'll be turning 18 this year. Although my parents swore no one would ever hire me with piercings and visible tattoos, I'm a gainfully employed medical professional. Reddit. It's been part of my daily routine for 13 years. Being gay. My grandma still thinks my younger cousin is confused. He just turned 33. Crap, I thought it was just a phase. From 11 through 19, I just sat there like an idiot thinking, everyone goes through these confusing feelings about being gay. I'll grow out of them. Then one day in college, I realized, oh no, wait, this is permanent. In middle school, I legit thought it was normal to look at men in the buff, because obviously I was just curious about the male anatomy. I thought one day my body would flip a switch and I'd start being attracted to women. They thought I'd grow out of talking back. Now I'm an accomplished intercollegiate debater. Wearing black all of the time. At one point in middle school, my parents refused to buy me any more black clothes, so I opted for dark purples and blues, which they couldn't really argue with. Over 15 years later, yeah, there's a reason I wore all black as a kid. It looks good on me. And so 90% of my wardrobe is still black, with exceptions from my other favorite color, teal, and some striking navy blue dresses I've picked up over the years. Me not ever wanting to have children. I found myself a great child-free husband and we're living happily ever after. Despite my parents and everyone else saying I'd changed my mind. I've known it since I was 12, I'm in my 30s now and I've never been more sure. I love my life. Luckily for them, they've accepted it. Atheism. I grew up in a fairly religious household and when I was a teenager, I stopped believing in God. They figured I'd come back to the church eventually, but after 16 years, it's not looking likely. Depression and anxiety. It's been 15 years. Still going strong. Yay! Anime. Nope, that crap stays with you for life. My parents gave me so much crap for it. But I liked it. They'd belittle me, forbid me, and generally judge me for my interests as if I was some terrible person. My mum didn't get it because apparently it's gross and weird, and therefore the worst thing ever. Didn't matter that I was lead in the school musical, never went to parties, got good grades, and played sports. I was wrong and messed up for liking anime. Now, at 27, I still enjoy it. It didn't warp me or mess me up. My mum has since chilled out after escaping the awful bullying environment that my father put on us. Now my younger brother is into it. We share interests in several animes, but he's into the, hardcore stuff, and I don't so much approve, but only because that obsession stems from his crippling lack of self-esteem and social immaturity. It holds him back and gives him excuses to hide inside himself. What my mother doesn't understand is how anime, like every single hobby out there, has just as much bad elements as good. She just can't accept that and it's holding her back from connecting with her kids. Being a girl. Yep, Thankfully, the phase theory went the way of the Barbies a long time ago. Being a metalhead that wears mostly black. Yep, 30 years and still headbanging. Listening to punk rock. 12 years later, my old man rolls his eyes whenever I play that headbanging crap. The fact that I'm an atheist. I told them when I was 14 years old and they laughed it off, saying that I was probably confused. They told me it was just a phase and they were totally sure I'd believe it again soon. I'm 21 and I still don't believe in anything mystical. I'm 100% atheist. My obsession with baking. They said it was too feminine. Guess who's not getting any of my muffins? You're lazy and you don't want to do your work. Turns out I have severe ADHD and an anxiety disorder. Joke's on you, parents. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Technically it did end because of professionalism, but I used to love doing crazy stuff with my hair. I had a red ombre, regular black and blonde ombre, the Skrillex look, shaved on the sides and long on top, a white blonde pixie cut, and pink hair. They said I'd look back and cringe. I look back and, man, I was hot as hell. Someday I'll be my own boss or working in a more creative field and I'll do it all again. Being an eco-warrior. My dad thought it's just a kid's hobby when an 11-year-old me bought a book on ecology and started sorting the trash. Gradually, he himself started recycling, saving energy and reusing. He doesn't admit my input, though. Physics. Social conventions and parental expectations of a safe, job-secure major made them make me join the mainstream of engineering that rules India today. They thought I'd forget physics, shut the frick up and get a cozy, middling job catering to their normal aspirations. Well, I stuck with it, self-studied physics, and they began supporting me in patches. And here I am, an undergraduate thesis in cosmology later, hoping graduate school applications in physics go well. I'm really a lesbian, and I still don't eat meat. Clichés for everyone. Dungeons and Dragons. I started playing it in '84 when I found a boxed set in a garage sale for $1. I still play it nowadays. Amen to that. The narrator's fascination with RPGs is going strong after 22 years. Although, to be fair, my parents likely knew that I was going to be a massive nerd my entire life. Those early yearbook photos are very telling. My love for professional wrestling. It started when I was 13, and by 15, I was telling them I wanted to be a wrestler. I'm 21 now and in the process of getting my body training going full blast before going to a wrestling school starting this summer. Loving punk rock, dyeing my hair bright colors or shaving my head or something in between. Being online all the time. I married the man that I met online. Video games. I'm still addicted, homies. That's what you get for never buying me a Nintendo. And, of course, being a disappointment. Mine thought that me living with them was a phase. Crap. Being socially awkward. Homosexuality. My obsession with the TV show Emergency. I'm now 55 years old and have been a paramedic for 37 years and a nurse for 24 years. Not wanting to have children and not doing substances or drinking booze. I'm 39, still child-free, and I don't take anything harder than Advil. Legos. I'm 25 and I still love me some Legos. Being vegan. Made the switch almost 2 years ago and I have no plans on going back. Wearing clothes of black, blue, and grey tones. Still stuck with some goth clothes as well. My mother told me computers were just a fad. Now I'm a support analyst making nearly twice as much as my father does after 27 years of law enforcement. I really love SpongeBob. When I was a kid, I constantly asked for SpongeBob sheets or other merch to decorate my room, but my mom insisted I style my room so it would grow with me. Senior year of high school, it was time to get new sheets, and guess what I asked for and finally got? I have SpongeBob stuff all over my room, a desk covered with SpongeBob McDonald's toys, a clock, posters, a calendar, SpongeBob stickers on almost everything I have. I even mounted a frisbee on the wall because it looked better there, and I don't play frisbee. I'm 21 and I have plans to get 2 SpongeBob tattoos in the future. I can't see myself falling out of love with the show anytime soon. Dyeing my hair different colors. I started bleaching and dyeing my hair in 3rd grade on my own, and I've been doing it ever since. The whole goth thing. I'm 29 and a mum now, and the darkness inside hasn't quite worn off. My childhood. Women's chests. My Chinese cartoon watching. Rock music, science fiction and fantasy, preferring not to be enclosed in the warm embrace of Jesus' love, the list goes on. My wife. We were high school sweethearts and no one thought it would last. Dated 3 years and then we got married and had 3 kids. Been married for over 17 years. Piercings, tattoos, and body mods. Me being a jerk. Wanting to leave my home country. It wasn't so much that they disapproved of it, but that I was just such an awkward homebody when I was younger that it didn't seem plausible. My dad traveled for a living, so it wasn't like it was a completely new concept to my family. Now my mum encourages it and thinks I should make it a focus once I leave college. My love for video games and cosplay. Been cosplaying 17 years now and gaming for 26. Being transgender. When I came out, my mum said, "No, you're not." 7 years later, she's paying for my name change. Well, I'm happy that the last bit would at least seem to suggest that she's accepted you for who you are, so congratulations. I'd say that trans, gay, and atheist seem to be the biggest answer group here. Good on all of you for being true to yourselves. Horses. Love at first sight. Mum got lucky and once managed to buy a few lessons for me. Then my father left and we were in poverty until I was in high school and could be a working student for a show barn. Traded hours and hours of work for a few minutes in the saddle of the crappiest horses that no one else wanted to ride. Not that I'm complaining. I never won any ribbons, but I damn sure learned to ride literally anything with 4 legs. I thank the trainers there that I was able to have such an opportunity at all. Fast forward a lot of years of barely being able to take some lessons here and there, and finally at 29 years old, I was able to purchase my own thoroughbred. I still work my butt off to afford him and his care. I found a barn where I can work off the majority of my board, but it's 100% worth it to achieve the dream I've had since I can remember. Now I have the best horse I could have asked for. He was a terrible racehorse, but he's the sweetest, coolest guy I could have got. Hopefully we end up eventing, but if he doesn't like that, we'll go for jumpers. His name? Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. Dyeing my hair unnatural colors. I've been doing it since I was 14, and now I'm 26 with green hair. Being into art and drawing. Dad wanted me to put down the pencil and be a scientist or railroad worker. Kept telling me my uncle could get me a job when I went to design school. Joke's on him, I'm a designer now. People pay me money to draw all day. Ha! The heavy metal music and dressing all in black, nerd, goth style at age 13. I'm now 22 and I still dress that way. My endless attempts to avoid all social contact. Grew my hair out long, had a good 2 to 3 year stint where I didn't own a single t-shirt that wasn't black, started being pretty sad all of the time, and started listening to much different music. Teenage stuff, I guess. While they might have been right about the lack of colors being a phase, I still really love emo music. Emo isn't a phase, Mom. First-person shooter games, computers, anything like that. That's not to say my parents didn't like computers, they just thought I'd move on. My depression. I really do wish it was just a phase. Cartoons, video games, anime, among others. Anime, I still watch but I'm pretty selective. But I got 2 video games for Christmas and there's new episodes of Steven Universe on Monday. I'm 28, married, and we just had our first kid. Sleeping with stuffed animals, only eating 3 or 4 different foods, and watching cartoons. Being antisocial. Frick people. Hey, frick you too, pal. Being obsessed with cats. Playing the drums. About to do a 2-month tour in Europe and just got booked for a week of shows in Japan. Becoming a Christian. Punk. Listening to metal, going to concerts, and wearing jeans and band t-shirts. Turns out I wasn't just pretending to be bisexual and transgender, but was in fact those things. 10 years after coming out and they still think it's just a phase. Just a really long phase. Beard. Granted, I was well into my 20s when I stopped shaving. My parents assumed I'd eventually get sick of it and shave it off, complaining about how I look like a hobo every visit. That was 7 years ago. Today, my glorious chin waterfall of man hair cascades all over my chest. Nobody complains about it. My wife came to accept it after about a year. My parents gave up after about 2. I got into metal music around age 15 and changed what I wear to leather and denim jackets with the band patches. Now I'm 20, I still love metal music and have a few battle jackets, and I designed my own patches. Horses. I took lessons for 7 years, got my own horse, went to farrier school and have been a farrier for 6 years now. Went on a trail ride with my horse today. Never going to let go of him. My parents used to tell me that I'd lose interest in gaming as I grew up. That didn't happen. I think my mum always assumed that my eating issues were just the usual teenage self-consciousness, but it's been 5 years and 40 pounds now, and I really think she's going to have to realize she's going to have a skinny, salad-loving daughter who swears she hates chocolate. Thinking that toots are funny. They always have been and always will be. Staying up all night. Paradoxically, I'm also a morning person, but I loathe afternoons. Seriously, why can't I nap from 12 p.m. to 6 p.m.? Single and child-free. I'm 45. Tooting on my sister's head.
Redditors who grew up with strict parents, what was the craziest rule or punishment you had to deal with? When I was in first grade, I had a writing homework assignment. My dad used to be weird about me erasing because he wanted me to do it right the first time. I ended up erasing a lot on this homework, and my dad took the paper from me, ripped it in half, and told me to start over. Turns out it was the last sheet of paper in the entire house, and I don't remember why, but for some reason we couldn't go and buy more paper that night. So, ironically, I ended up having to completely erase an old homework assignment in order to have a sheet of paper to start over on. I'm 22 now and still give him crap about this. How is starting over on a new piece of paper any different than erasing what you were already doing? I don't really understand the logic on this one. The word disgusting was banned and could have been considered just as bad as saying the F word. We weren't allowed to close doors unless we were in the bathroom. We weren't allowed to watch Cartoon Network because it was garbage. They actually put a parental lock on Cartoon Network. The worst punishment was one time they decided that we were such bad kids, my sister was like 14 and I was 12-ish, that they took everything we owned and bagged it up into garbage bags and made us carry them out to a burn pile, and they burnt everything we owned. All of my childhood memorabilia, pictures, clothes, diaries, everything. All of it burnt. It was kind of messed up. When it was done burning, the next day or so later, my sister and I looked through the ashes, and all that was left were 2 silver rings of hers that we cleaned off and kept. It was kind of crazy. I once got beaten and locked in the basement because my hands were literally not large enough to play a certain piano piece. I couldn't play an octave separation yet. Before you ask, yes, I am Asian. I didn't ask, but makes sense. I wasn't allowed to use public restrooms. I ruined our Disney trip because of how many times we had to go back to the hotel, which wasn't on site. And I was 6 years old at the time. I quite honestly had accidents when I was far too old to do so because my parents had my teachers reporting bathroom use to them too. There was no place I could safely use the restroom, other than home. Without getting into trouble, that is. Finally, I got to use public restrooms without punishment when I went to college. No, I'm not kidding. But I got pretty good at hiding restroom use in high school because the high school refused to report it to my parents. Why did none of these teachers spot the abuse? My parents once grounded me for 2 years for getting a B on my report card. Took everything out of my room besides the bed, and I wasn't allowed to do anything with friends. A year and a half into it, I asked if I could be ungrounded. And at that point, they had actually forgotten what they'd grounded me for, but refused because I must have done something bad if they grounded me. Also, they refused to let me stay up past 8 p.m., even in high school. If it's not important enough for you to remember, then it's not important enough to take away all of your kids' stuff for 2 whole years. When I was in elementary school at about 6 years old, I used to have accidents because my bladder was too small. My mom would punch me in the bladder when I got home to make me pee myself and make fun of me when I did. I still have issues, and it turns out that my bladder and uterus is messed up from a genetic disease. That's actually just messed up. No talking at the dinner table other than the occasional "do you want some more blank" or "pass the blank." We couldn't talk about anything at all. No small or idle chat was allowed. First time you did it, you got yelled at. Second time was a whooping and then sent to your room until the next day, without the rest of your meal. I make it a point now with my kids to chat up a storm each and every meal. You could earn a full-on whooping for uttering any of the following: shut up, but, or accusing someone of lying for any reason. We were not permitted to use the words lie, liar, or lying. Instead, we had to say, that's not the truth, or that doesn't sound right, or any other phraseology that wasn't some iteration of the word lie. This sounds like there's some deeper damage going on in your parents' psyche around the word lie. Otherwise, I don't see why they'd be so sensitive about the word. As the eldest son of a Southern Baptist preacher, I was held to some high standards. Being seen and not heard, and that my every action was a reflection of my father as a leader to his congregation. I found music to be a great outlet, but of course any non-Christian music was not allowed and immediately destroyed upon discovery. Spare the rod, spoil the child was a mantra ingrained in my daily life. Once I was into my teens and spankings with stretched out coat hangers was no longer enough to be considered punishment due to the lack of tears, my father moved on to shaving my head. Nothing like the constant reminder of how untrustworthy one is once their physical source of personal identity is forcibly removed. As soon as you said Southern Baptist preacher, I knew this was going to be bad. My mother is an honest-to-God narcissist. I graduated from high school early at 16 and didn't go to college immediately, so I worked a part-time job while all my friends went to school. Anyways, when all my friends graduated high school, we celebrated by going to the movies. My friend's mom dropped us off and another friend's father was going to be picking us up. My mom was very upset at me going to the movie anyways, since it wasn't going to be over until after 9 p.m., by bedtime at the time. Anyways, finally she lets me go on the condition that my friend's dad gets me home by 10 p.m. My friend's father ran into late night construction on the way home with me and several other friends in the van, and the closer it got to 10 p.m., the more I started freaking out, telling everyone I was going to be in huge trouble if I didn't get home like right now. My friend's father assured me he would speak to my mom and all would be fine. I was the first to be dropped off because I was panicking so severely. The moment the van pulls into the driveway, my mom comes barreling out of the house, telling me she was going to kick my butt for being late and keeping her up. My friend's dad tried to calm her down and separate her from hitting me. That's when she realizes I'm chewing gum. Now, my mother hated gum. Said the only reason you would ever chew gum was to hide something. So naturally, she makes the assumption I was late and chewing gum because I was busy fooling around with my friend's dad. Yeah, that was the only explanation in her mind. She grounded me for 12 weeks, an entire summer. I wasn't allowed to have a phone, cell phone, TV, or books the entire summer. Every morning, my mom would take the cable box, home phone handset, and keyboard to make sure I couldn't do anything. Needless to say, my friends never invited me anywhere again in fear that my mom would call the cops and accuse me of fooling around with their dad. She also used to report my car stolen if I didn't call her back when I was in college. What's going on with your mom that's the first thing that her mind goes to? Who does she think you are? Shouldn't she be more confident in how she raised you? I dealt with a narcissistic and abusive mother, and most of my punishments weren't huge because I was a really good kid. But on my 18th birthday, because I asked for gas money the day before, the first time ever, she took mine and her car keys with her to work, and took the shed key so I couldn't even ride my bike. She left a note on the kitchen table saying, "Happy 18th, now you're an adult, so get out of my house." I spent my birthday alone, trapped, and miserable. All over $10. One day, the news said the school might be closed for a cold day, like a snow day, but when it's cold enough, your exposed skin freezes in less than 10 minutes. My mom demanded I start walking to school or she'd report me to the cops as truant. We argued about it, but the TV said school started late that day. I decided to go anyways. That being better than the arguing. She then decided I was to stay home for her to call the cops. I shoved past her, which she yelled at me was assault, and then locked me out of the house. Halfway to school, I was told the school was closed. I had to call my dad to be let into the house again. That day, I promised myself I'd leave home as soon as possible. I've stayed halfway across the country from my mom ever since. Your mom sounds like the type of person that's just looking for and wants to start problems. I don't blame you for wanting to get out of there as soon as possible. My mom was raised in a very strict and abusive environment. When my sister and I became teenagers, she was struggling with mental health issues and also never had a good example of what level-headed parenting looked like. It doesn't excuse some of the things she did, but I'm more understanding now that I'm older. Anyway, the craziest, most out-of-hand moment. My sister and I are 16 months apart in age and had a lot of the same friends in high school. When I was 14 and she was 15, our curfew was 9, but we got a summertime curfew of 10 o'clock. This was before everyone had a cell phone. Our friend was watching the time, but we got caught up in our night games. We were literally playing hide and seek. We lost track of time and realized at 5 after 10 that we were late, and managed to get home by 10 after. My mom was furious and made us sit down at the kitchen table for a 30-minute lecture, during which she slammed a utensil so hard on a plate in front of my sister that glass shards flew into her face. My sister got up and left the room at that point, but when I tried to do the same, my mom put me in a headlock, like freaking WWE style, and I punched her in the back to get her to let go. My sister and I were both grounded for something like 2 weeks, and I got an extra week for hurting my mom. The most ridiculous punishment? My sister, at age 16, picked up smoking cigarettes. She'd been at it for a week. I told her it was on her own head and that it wasn't worth it and she should stop, but she kept doing it. Whatever, not my problem. She, like an idiot, pressed her luck and brought cigarettes into the house, where my mom found them in her room. Our mom would go through our stuff constantly. I literally had to hide any CD with profanity or things like permanent markers that we could get high off of. They separated us and played good cop, bad cop. My sister, again, the idiot, totally bought it when my mom told her I'd blabbed about everything and they knew the truth. I was in the other room denying any knowledge or involvement. Anyway, this happened a week before summer vacation. My sister was grounded for the entire summer vacation. 2 months, no friends, no going out, 10 minutes of phone time a day, no electronics, no internet, no pool, no movie theater, nothing. My punishment? The exact same thing. For not coming to my parents and telling on my sister. My parents also decided to sand and paint the baseboards that summer and forced us to do it all. That summer was literally the worst. I spent a large portion of my teen years being grounded for minor things, or for not being the sister spy. It sucked, especially considering I got decent if not great grades, never drank, smoked, tried drugs, had sex, skipped class, or otherwise got into any kind of trouble. I'm almost 30 and about to have my second kid, and I'm still a little salty about it. My parents tried so hard to keep us from experiencing normal teenage stuff that both me and my sister made some really poor choices once we had the tiniest amount of freedom. That's something I think a lot of parents aren't aware of, is that the harder you push, the harder they pull away. You're gonna be this super strict about your kid, then yeah, the second they have some freedom, they're gonna go nuts. And they don't know how to control themselves because they've never gotten to enjoy fun before. It makes sense that they're gonna get a little carried away. No TV. Not as a punishment, just no TV, ever. Because apparently it lets the devil in. The second I, as the last kid, moved out, they started watching TV all the time. As punishment, my dad would make us face a corner, stand on one leg, and keep both arms straight up in the air for a certain length of time. If our leg or arms went down, he'd double the time. Sometimes he'd give you a surprise visit from his belt or shoe if he was particularly angry. At least I grew up to have fantastic balance. My grandmother was a retired English teacher. One day, I called my brother stupid. I was 4 or so. She filled me in on her rule that if I couldn't spell stupid, but I called someone stupid, then it was really me that was stupid. Thus, I should never call someone a name that I couldn't spell. So, in my 4-year-old head, rather than avoid name calling, I realized that I did know how to spell the word dumb. So that word must be permitted. I spent the rest of the day overusing the word dumb, and she wasn't quite sure what to do at that point. My mom gave me a black eye one night when I came home from a friend's birthday party at a skate rink. She made me tell people that I fell down and got hit in the eye by one of the wheels on a skate. I was 12. It was because I forgot to put away the dishes before I left. She also regularly broke remote controls, throwing them at me. would slam my doors open so hard the doorknobs would smash through the drywall, stole the allowance my granddad gave me, no matter where I hid it, and recently ripped a pair of my headphones out of my ears while I was using them and broke them by repeatedly whipping me in the face with them, then followed it up by punching me a few times in the face. The last instance was about 4 to 5 months ago. I moved out and she regularly contacts me demanding money. I really hope you aren't giving her any money, my friend. We weren't allowed to have food upstairs, but I had food wrappers in my trash can, so they searched my whole room, ripping clothes off hangers, throwing stuff out of drawers, etc. And for 3 months, I wasn't allowed in my room for anything, unless accompanied by one of them. I had to sleep on the couch. I don't understand how parents can take stuff to such an extreme and still think that they're doing right by their child. I have a literal book worth of stories of the abuse I survived through, but one time Dr. Phil's show told my mother that having a bed was a luxury for kids, so she immediately took mine away. I slept on a cold wood floor until I escaped that hellhole and cut off all contact. My dorm in college was the first real bed I'd slept in for 10 years. I didn't own a bed when I moved into my first apartment after college, so I was back on the wood floor. I'd moved in with the clothes on my back, my cat and her stuff, and my laptop, which I used to make money by transcribing at night, while I worked for $7 an hour, 12 hours a week at a deli. It was the only place that would hire me since I didn't have access to my own car. I cried myself to sleep every night on that wood floor. It was a reminder of how much I'd failed, leaving myself back in that position. My roommate must have heard me crying one night and figured it was back pain, because they lent me an air mattress to sleep on. It was like I'd moved into a 4-star hotel. Eventually, I saved up a spare $50 and bought a bed off Craigslist. Sketchy, but I hadn't owned my own bed in 16 years before that. I still have the bed and refuse to part with it because I don't want to end up on the floor again. I have many chronic back problems that I don't think will ever be fixed due to being forced to sleep on the floor starting at age 7. I take pain meds when I can and do yoga, but it doesn't help. Sometimes when I can't sleep in my normal bed, I find myself defaulting to the floor. When I wake up, I cry because I'm worried I'll always be like this. Parents have no idea how much they can mess up their kids. Ah yes, Dr. Phil. Responsible for a good amount of parental abuse, I'm pretty sure. This one time, I didn't want to finish drinking my milk, so my dad threw the cup across the room, shattering it and getting milk everywhere, while he proceeded to flip my chair over while I was still in it. He then crouched over my body saying, "You want to mess with me?" a bunch and stormed out telling me to clean up the mess. And just lots more stuff like that. I once said whatever to my dad at a Bubba Gump's restaurant on vacation in Hawaii. He proceeded to scream at me and yelled at me to get out of the restaurant. I just sat there, mortified, and he left instead. I got grounded from an end-of-the-year party when I was 11 for getting a B on a paper, even though I still got all A's. I was devastated. It was thrown by my best friend, and I was never allowed to do anything, and I'd been looking forward to it all year. I had the perfect dress to wear because my aunt's mother had taken me shopping and bought this cool dress that made me feel like Molly Ringwald. I had never been allowed to wear it before, and it had been in my closet since September. I was seriously having a Cinderella moment, although I honestly related more to Jane Eyre because I was adopted and a bookworm. The day of the party comes around and I'm bawling. I'm a good kid. I try to be perfect every waking moment. Now I'm grounded from my best friend's party. The mom of my best friend knows how tough it is at home. I'm screamed at, belittled, hit all the time. This party was a beacon. My friend's mom barges into my house, tells me to get ready and get my stuff together because I'll be spending the night. My mom protests. How about I call CPS about the 50 cats in your house? I end up going to the party and she teaches me to be a badass. I had all the usual punishments. No video games for a week, no TV for X nights, no pocket money this week, groundings, you name it, I probably had it at one point or another. One particular punishment tops the rest though for creativity and cruelty. One day I was at a friend's place with my parents and discovered that if we opened his bedroom window all the way, we could squeeze out of it and climb onto his roof. His bedroom was on the second floor of their house, and they lived on top of a hill. So if we had fallen, we would have fallen probably 7 to 8 meters and then tumbled another 20 to 30 to the bottom of the hill. Anyway, both sets of parents walk outside at one point and hear us talking from the roof. They flip their lids and call us back inside. We scramble back into his bedroom and are sitting there terrified when our parents storm in. We get called down into the kitchen and are told to sit down at the kitchen table and await our punishment. My friend's dad opens up the pantry and starts pulling things out to make a sandwich. Then it hits us like a ton of bricks. Our punishment is to eat a sandwich made of the most ill-complementing, grotesque food combinations that he had at his disposal. The final product ended up being an unholy blend of Vegemite, oysters, anchovies, cheese, creamed corn, raw beef mince, and hot English mustard. I actually don't recall what it tasted like, other than being awful. Looking back on it as an adult, I reckon it was just as much for their entertainment than our punishment. But damn if it wasn't creative. For me, it was always the wooden spoon. I got the wooden spoon until I was probably 15. Then, when my mom broke it over my backside because I wouldn't stop laughing, she moved to the metal one. Standing in the corner was another big one. My youngest sister got smart though and would get the corner where she could see the TV. So that was exchanged for flat walls on your knees, Malcolm in the Middle style. Another weird one I got was when my sister and I wouldn't stop fighting, my mom made us sit next to each other holding hands and not speaking for hours on end. I couldn't drink water from my bathroom. My bathroom genuinely had colder water, and the best water in the house. My mom got suspicious when I'd leave to my bathroom for a few seconds every few minutes. I don't know what she possibly thought I was doing with it, but no more bathroom water, and I had to drink lukewarm peasant water like the rest of my family. This one's pretty tame, but honestly just doesn't make sense. Who cares if that's the water they want to drink? I also agree, bathroom water, for whatever reason, tends to be better than kitchen water. I grew up the firstborn son of an officer in the Air Force in the Bible Belt. I was an extremely inquisitive child and mentioned anything weird I found that didn't make sense in the Bible, resulting in a beating either with a belt or a wooden spoon with my pants down. I wasn't allowed to play Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh or anything, as it was all satanic. So, of course now I play a boatload of Japanese card games and escapist video games, listen to obnoxious screaming noises, and have a healthy interest in European occultism. Go me, I guess. What's an experience you and a friend shared where you both silently agreed to never speak of it again? In grade school, a friend tried to make his pee hole bigger with an Allen key. I told him he shouldn't try, but he did anyway. There was a lot of blood, and it was pretty messed up. He just wrapped his bits in toilet paper, and nothing was said of the incident ever again. What the? Why would you even do that? I slept with a female friend of mine at her brother's birthday party. I ended up finishing all over a huge beanbag. After we got cleaned up and everything, we hung out. Her brother and his 11-year-old friends come running in and they start jumping on the beanbag that we forgot to clean. After jumping around for a bit, a lot of them started noticing wet spots on each other. We told them we spilled water and have not had a conversation about it to this day. I, female, semi-drunkenly hooked up with one of my guy friends, who I'd known for a long time. He has some really tiny equipment, maybe 2 to 3 inches erect. He was really nervous about it, but I didn't really mind since he was quite good at other stuff. The next morning, we were cuddling in bed and he begged me not to tell any of our friends about our hookup or his size. We're still good friends and his secret will always be safe with me. I went streaking with my male friend while very drunk. His big-boobed girlfriend decided to join in the nudity. I said she had some nice ones once they're revealed. My friend decides he doesn't like me ogling her jumblies and decides to fight me. Let the drunken nude wrestling begin. Back in middle school, a friend and I, both girls, used to sit on the couch in my basement and use one of those giant yoga balls to press into each other's crotches to get off. It felt great, and we would softly talk dirty to each other the whole time. This happened 2 or 3 times she came over. Haven't talked about it since. When I was nearing the end of my freshman year of college, a few friends of mine dropped acid one Sunday afternoon. The acid was apparently very strong, and all but one of them went off trip-a-dip-a-doodling on their merry way. The one I speak of got stuck in his own head and was found wandering through the halls, buck naked with a blank expression on his face. Oh, and I also forgot to mention, this was during family visit weekend. Anyways, after a couple of friends and I grab a towel and corral my fried friend into a dorm room, he proceeds to sit on a bed and stare out the window, still completely naked. Being the responsible person I am, I realize that he's so out of touch with reality to the point that he may accidentally hurt himself if left alone. So I tell the gathering crowd that I'll stay with him and they can go enjoy the beautiful Sunday Santa Cruz afternoon. I then grabbed the nearest smoking device and got incredibly stoned while I had to stare 4 hours at my naked friend on LSD while he worked his way out of his psychedelic pickle. Several people casually walked into the room, stared at my friend, stared at me, laughed, and then turned around and left during this time. A few hours into my marathon pot-laden babysitting venture, he looked over at me, stood up to put his pants on, and said, "That was really weird. We haven't mentioned it since." I walked in on my roommate and good friend taking care of himself. I saw everything. He'll occasionally try to jokingly bring it up when we're drunk or something, but I shut him down. Always. I'd rather just pretend it never happened. I, male, was probably 7 years old and at my male best friend's house playing Mario Kart, and we caught his mom giving my dad a BJ. Proceeded to act it out and get caught by them. They were peeved, but agreed to say nothing on the agreement we said nothing to our other parents. Didn't really help. Both marriages were crap. I'm sorry, what do you mean you proceeded to act it out? Never mind, I don't want to know. I, a straight male, had been drinking heavily with some friends all day and had recently returned from a nighttime skinny dip. I, being too drunk to get dressed, was just in a towel. We were all around the fire when I start to feel a bit sick. I end up accidentally dropping my towel and half crawling over to one of the girls, throwing up on her while halfway across. Apparently, every time I would heave, I would thrust a bit, so my bits were slapping her in the face. I woke up naked, spooning another friend's boyfriend in their tent with no recollection of the night's events. This would count, except they all seemed to never shut up about it. I mean, if I woke up in that situation, I definitely have some questions. So yes, please talk to me about it. What the heck happened? A buddy of mine was driving with me as a passenger. We went down the road near his house along the lake when he says, "Check her out. A woman in a bikini is going down for a swim. What a butt." He slowed down so I could roll down the window and do a catcall. We were stupid 17-year-olds. I was leaning out the window yelling, "Woo, baby, nice butt." She turned around and it was his mom. Nothing too crazy, but my best friend has never kissed a guy and she was afraid she would mess it up, so she begged me to teach her first. I'm a girl, by the way. I agreed, and I knew she was nervous, so we had a few glasses of wine first and then we tried to practice. I lean in to kiss her and she giggles, which makes me laugh. After several unsuccessful tries, we actually managed lip contact for about half a minute. I was really proud of her because I knew she was nervous. She suddenly bursts into tears and gets snot all over me, and cries about being a bad friend asking me to do this. I probably shouldn't have given her so much to drink in hindsight. We never speak of it only because we know we'll just laugh too much and she's mortified. On a college trip abroad, my best friend and I head up to our hotel room. We get asked by one of our tutors to get our other tutor from his room. We knock on the door and realize it's ajar. We sheepishly head inside quietly and spot a big bag of white powder on the bed with lines on the sideboard. Glance at each other, shake our heads, walk out, and get pizza. I was at my friend's house at around the age of 13. We're making tea and I open the cupboard for a mug. Inside is a Tupperware box with a large square tinfoil packet, around the size of a 5-kilo bag of sugar, and a bunch of little bags of brown powder. I take the cups out and close the cupboard and don't say a word. 10 years on and we've still never discussed it, and I don't think I've talked about it with anyone else either. Interestingly, his dad's a great guy and has been a very hands-on father despite divorcing my friend's mom. My best friend's husband hit on me a month before the wedding. We had all been drinking that night. He was wasted, and I was slightly tipsy but fully aware. I told him off and told him if I ever found out he tried that with another girl, I'd rip his appendage off. I was maid of honor at the wedding and I never told her. I thought about it, but they had already bought a house together. The wedding was set and she was just so happy. I put it out of my mind and pretended it never happened, and I'm glad I did. They were married for 5 years before she got brain cancer and died, leaving behind a daughter. He was the most doting husband during the 7 months she wasted away and is a truly amazing father. He's remarried now and the most loyal man I've ever met. If I had taken his one idiot move as the basis for his life, I could quite possibly have ruined a lot for him and her. I was unsure if I was doing the right thing at the time, but now I know it was definitely the best thing to do. Wow, that one really took a turn I was not expecting. Goes to show you though, sometimes good people just make mistakes. I had a drunken 5-way with my roommate, his girlfriend, and another couple. 3 guys, 2 girls. We all ended up blacking out and only had vague memories of strip poker and awkwardness in the morning. Until we found the video. We all decided to delete the video and never talk about it ever again. The next month was very quiet. In 7th grade, my best friend and I were playing basketball at the park. I had to poo so bad, but the closest toilet was across the street. So I stopped and pulled my shorts away from my body and let the poop fall without touching my shorts. We walked away casually and no one saw. Ew, come on, man. Just hold it till you get there. A few years ago, I was at a party and had gone with a longtime female friend. All was well at first, but as the night went on, we both had a bit too much to drink. Her boyfriend of over 2 years had suddenly dumped her by text, and I had just found out my girlfriend had cheated on me. I say this because we were both dancing and both buzzed and emotionally unstable. As a joke, she grinds into me, laughing as she does it, but I start getting aroused and grind back. I suddenly realize what I'm doing and back off. But her face is red and she's visibly aroused. She pulls me into the bathroom and we proceed to get to business. Not super hot, lustful animal stuff, but we both enjoyed it and make out for a few minutes, then we both duck out, using the excuse I had to hold her hair as she puked. The hostess, a mutual friend, offered us to stay the night, which we took her up on. She passed out and I was having a heart attack. We were buzzed. What if she freaks out? Did I just ruin a 7-year-long close friendship just to feel good and make our exes angry? A million things ran through my mind, and I eventually nodded off. I woke up an hour later with her sprawled on me, which is fine. We've shared a bed more than a few times. She wakes up and blinks, looks at me and goes, "What the hell? Buy me dinner first next time, dork." She ends it with a laugh, but my face must have been ghost white. She hugs me and says, "2 consenting adults had fun. Plus, hey, better someone I know and trust rather than some weird jerk who might have tried something weird. We're still friends, okay? If you need to be alone, I understand." I hug her back and ask her if she's up for some IHOP. All is well and we're still best of friends and hang out regularly. That was about 2 years ago, and we both haven't said a word about it. We traded drunken, confusing oral at the tender age of 16. He initiated it, but I didn't need much persuading. Felt great at the time, but 10 minutes later started a spiral of self-doubt and confusion that lasted about a year. Worked it out in the end. He went on to marry a woman. I'm in a civil partnership with a man. We never mentioned it after that night, and given I moved away a few years later, plus, his lady wife, it's unlikely to ever be spoken of again, except here, now. When I was about 4 years old or so, I had a best friend whose name shall not be disclosed. We'll call him Tom. Tom and I lived in the same neighborhood, so we had plenty of opportunities to stay over at each other's houses while our mothers jibber-jabbed in the next room. When we were at my house, we played in the basement, which was outfitted as a playroom, with trains and Legos and all sorts of fun things, like markers. So he and I are downstairs in the playroom and he decides that he's done with the trains, so he picks up an orange marker. We didn't have any paper, so he finds this felt dartboard and colors on the white cardboard backing. I want to get along with him, so I do the same, choosing a green marker. Well, he soon gets bored with this as well, but he thinks the colors would look cooler if the lights were out. So he waddles up to the light switch, climbs on top of the toy chest, and turns off the lights. The colors do indeed look cooler. Of course, coloring is only so much fun when one is full of chocolate milk. So we both get up and walk over to where we tossed our socks earlier. I don't remember why we took off our socks, but it must have been something they said because we immediately peed all over them. Our socks were soon thoroughly soaked with our urine. This gave Tom an idea. He looked down at his mini member and thought to himself, "Know what would look really cool if it were orange?" At least, I assume that's what he was thinking, because he then started coloring his bits orange. Maybe he just wanted a better tan. And of course, Tom is absolutely right. It does look cooler. But you know what's cooler than orange? Green. Green is much cooler than orange. So I proceed to color my own willy green. Cue our Catholic mothers. Tom's mother is absolutely horrified. At least, that's what my own mother tells me. To be honest, I don't remember much after coloring the felt dartboard. My own mother, thankfully I guess, took a much more humorous approach. She thought it was hysterical. Anyway, they took us upstairs to the bathroom and made us wash our little dongs in the bathtub, while my mother washed and dried our socks. After that, Tom and his mom went home. I've never heard anything about that incident from anybody aside from my mother, and vague memories are my only assurance that the story is true. In any case, neither Tom nor I have ever spoken of it, nor will I ever, except to my fiance, because if I don't, my mother will. Come on, Ma, be cool around the fiance. When I was 15, my friend Gerald was staying over for the weekend. It was the typical Friday night. We were up playing video games on my N64, hanging out, and watching random horror movies at a low volume with the dialogue replaced with our own snarky narration while he browsed the net on my computer. This would be rude ordinarily, but he didn't have a computer or the internet at his home, and it was an opportunity for him to get some exposure to both. We were playing Gauntlet Legends when he paused the game and looked at me. Dude, your arm's bleeding. Oh, I must have gotten myself on a tree while I was dirt biking. It's nothing. I'm fine. Now let's kill some dwarves. We started up again, but I could see him looking at my arm every few minutes out of the corner of my eye. He paused the game again and dropped the controller between his knees. So if you don't tell me what's actually wrong, I'm waking up your mom. I'm fine. Dude, cut it out. When you got up to grab a drink, your sleeve pulled up and I saw him. I sat there for a bit, closed my eyes and sighed. He knew, so there was no point in hiding it or keeping up the charade. He lifted my sleeve as I sat there and hung my head quietly, then backed away in hushed silence. When I looked up to make eye contact, his eyes were rimmed with tears. Why would you do that to yourself, man? Those aren't clean lines. You carved them with something. It's complicated. Then uncomplicate it for me. So I told him the truth. I was deeply depressed. My family was disintegrating, and it was the only way to get that kind of bottled emotional pain out of my system. I was halfway through explaining myself when he wrapped his arms around me and hugged the breath out of me. I love you, original poster. Not in a gay way. You're my best friend and you're like a brother to me. I'm there for you, man. Just don't do this again, alright? I won't tell anyone, but you'd better promise me that you'll call me the next time it gets that bad. The rest of the night was understandably strained. No matter how we tried to forget it all, the elephant was still in the room. We never spoke about it again. He did his best to pretend nothing had happened the next day and would flat out not acknowledge my wounds. Okay, to anyone that's going through anything like this, there's always someone that wants to hear from you. Even if you don't feel like you have a close friend, there are numbers that you can call and people that you can talk to. Please, take care of yourself and love yourself. Kindly, a random stranger on the internet. 6th grade, outdoor school. Him and I ate a lot of pudding. A load of pudding. That night, we both book it to the bathroom, almost pooping our pants. We get to the toilets and just let it rip, and holy crap did we crap. We're sitting in adjacent stalls and we're just laughing our butts off at the sound of each other's poop. Think like fire hoses. Good stuff. We decided to never speak about that again, but really it's not that bad. Pretty funny. Me and my friend were both maybe 8 or 9, and we were watching adult content in his basement. He says, "This might seem weird, but when I watch this or see a hot girl, my thing gets real hard and bigger." I say, having knowledge of this for some reason, it gets hard so it will fit into the girl's stuff. A soft one would probably just mush to the side. I pretty much gave my friend the talk because his dad never did, or never got the chance, because he died when we were 12. In high school, a friend had a party at his place. I had pre-gamed and drank a bit too much too fast and spent a majority of the party laying on the couch with my head spinning. As the party died down a bit, a good female friend, I'm male, came over and started rubbing my head and shoulders and asking if I felt okay. The party host announced he was going downstairs with his girlfriend and not to come down there unless you wanted to join. I looked up at my friend and asked if she wanted to go downstairs on a silly whim. She agreed, which caught me completely by surprise. I had no idea how much she had to drink either, but alas, we went down to the basement as well. I don't even know what I was expecting. When we got there, my friend's bedroom door was closed and locked, and he promptly told us to go away. Her and I went over to his couch and sat down together. I don't even know how it started. We just started making out. Nothing serious, just some hand stuff. We went to the bathroom, cleaned up, and literally never spoke a word about it, ever again. So I'm part of this 3-man best friend group thing. We'll call these 2 best friends D and M. They're both like brothers to me, and we've known each other for around a decade. We're all in our early 20s. The kind of friendship where we can and do talk about anything without discomfort. We cannot be uncomfortable around each other anymore. One of our random guy talks goes in the direction of sexuality one day, and I mention the idea that I'm probably bi. There's a point that's made relating back to the fact that we have this 3-way bromance going on where we joke about being lovers and stuff. And there was a tongue-in-cheek joke rumor that I was secretly dating D in high school. So it's funny that I'm not straight. Funny. One day, I'm hanging out with D and just chatting. Topic of sex stuff comes up. He asks me about my bi-ness. Asks if I've ever thought about him or M in that way. Oh man, I know you're just curious, but come on. This isn't gonna end well. I go for honesty and openness, and he responds in kind, because we're the kind of guys that can speak honestly without awkwardness. No need to dress things up. So we talk frankly about the theoretical idea of the 2 of us as a romantic couple, on the assumption that speaking about it seriously doesn't mean we're serious about it. We get stuck on this topic and somehow come to the conclusion that we wouldn't make a bad couple. Too bad he isn't into guys, right? Long story short, it ends up being a long night. And the more he thinks about it, the more he doesn't see such a problem with the idea. I knew we were tight, but this is something else. He's similarly surprised by how much the idea doesn't faze him, and within a couple hours, our tone moves from neutral comments stemming from simple curiosity to a pretty serious discussion that sounds like he might try to take it somewhere. I don't know what happened, seriously, but suddenly it's like 1 a.m. in the morning and he straight up asks me out, completely serious. As far as I know, the dude's completely straight, and I've been best friends with him for half my life. Suddenly, he's telling me he thinks he loves me, and it feels so natural to say that, and why didn't he say it sooner? And I'm sorry, man, but I don't see you in that way. Emotional intimacy is one thing, and we got that going for us. You're a cool guy, really, but I can't accept this. I just can't see you in that way at this point. I can't. It's never been brought up again. What movie had a happy ending until you consider what had to happen next? At the end of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, you just know that Cameron is going to get his butt whooped by his dad. Braveheart. I mean, the movie is historically inaccurate, but it ends at the Battle of Bannockburn, where the narrator says they won their freedom, but that freedom only lasted like 5 years before war broke out again. Breakfast Club. Bender most likely went home and got beaten by his dad again after the movie ended. The Truman Show. This guy has no idea what the real world is like, and he's just thrown into it. Most people have 18 years of preparation. If we're being honest here, he probably sued the crap out of them, so I'm sure Truman was living in luxury afterwards. Lawyers would be jumping to take this case. The Day After Tomorrow. It isn't hugs and giggles. Things do not go back to normal. The human race got slapped hard. Much of the upper hemisphere is covered in ice. Let's not mince words. A few billion people died. Whole nations were wiped off the map. Yes, you have survivors, but now this problem. Food. A huge section of the world's agriculture was taken away. How are you going to feed the remaining masses? This doesn't include shelter. Those lucky ones who are on the edge of the frost are going to move further down, South America and Africa. While true, the ice will melt eventually, this massive snow front will have a huge effect on global climates. Everything will be colder, sunlight being reflected off the surface rather than absorbed. The survivors will have such terrible hardships ahead. It will take a generation or more to bounce back. We're not even talking about political turmoil. Warlords, tyrants, and dictators will rise to power. Wars over limited resources. The movie ends with our gang getting picked up by what remains of the US government. The future is so uncertain. Many more will perish from harsh weather, starvation, sickness, and/or hostilities. We don't just hold hands and sing Kumbaya. The human race will suffer with huge blood losses to come. I think I kind of want to see this sequel now. The Day After Tomorrow. Wall-E. It would still take decades before the people were actually able to live off the Earth, and their quality of life would still be awful compared to their lives in the ship. Monsters, Inc. There's a reason they made a prequel and not a sequel. Laughter being 10 times more powerful means a lot of factory monsters would have lost their jobs, even accounting for the energy crisis. Rent. Mimi has AIDS. She'll definitely be dead soon. Roger and Collins have HIV in the 80s. They'll probably be dead soon. Mark is all alone and is gonna watch his best friends die. Joanne and Maureen might get a happy ending though. Yeah, the characters in Rent get it pretty rough. The Sound of Music. The nuns were almost definitely executed by the Nazis as soon as it became apparent they helped the family escape. Almost any horror movie where one character makes it through the entire movie and is the last man standing, actually usually a female, covered in blood and surrounded by dead bodies. What happens when the police arrive? Yeah, I can't say that looks good. Whiplash. Outwardly, it seems like a happy ending. Andrew proves Fletcher wrong and showcases his abilities as a musician. However, that's exactly what Fletcher wanted, and proved that his abusive teaching style works. All Fletcher wanted was his Charlie Parker. That's why he was so angry when his former student died. He thought he was going to fill that role. When Andrew begins his solo, at first Fletcher is clearly mad and confused. But as Andrew continues, Fletcher guides him, and the movie ends with them sharing eye contact before finishing the song. With this, Andrew becomes his Charlie Parker, something Fletcher can put on a pedestal and say, I created that talent. You also have to consider what happens to Andrew after this. He goes right back into the abuse he suffered from under Fletcher, and loses all the love and enjoyment that he has for jazz music. In my opinion, I see Andrew having a similar fate with either the real Charlie Parker, a heroin addict who died of overdose at 34, or Fletcher's former student who took their own life. Zootopia. The whole plot of the movie hinges on reshaping the natural order by all living in unity. That's great. Right until you realize that herbivores are still super good at reproducing to make up for carnivores, as shown by the rabbit population sign counter going up at a ridiculous rate gag. Except nobody's eating them anymore. By the end of the movie, it's also revealed that there's herbivore extremists which want to take it further and get rid of carnivores. Overpopulation and possibly genocide is on its way. Kate and Leopold. Kate finds out that she can't vote or own property anymore now that she's living in the past. Also, she has to live with the knowledge that she porked her own grandson. The Avengers. Everyone's sitting around having coffee and they're still pulling bodies out of the rubble. Back to the Future. Marty is now essentially living with a family of strangers. It's not going to take them long to realize he has no knowledge of any conversation they've ever had or anything they've ever done together. Also, let's just keep that guy who tried to assault your mom around so we can wash our car. And why does our son seem to look exactly like that guy from high school? Finding Nemo. How do the fish get out of those plastic bags? They're probably dead. One of them even says, "Now what?" Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. It seems as though they were meant for each other because even with no memory of each other, they still find each other and fall in love. As the movie foreshadows with repeating or glitching the last shot of the film, they're doomed to a cycle of meeting, falling in love, breaking up, heartbreak, erasing their memories about each other, and repeat. This one is heavily implied by the movie, but yes, you do need to kind of play past the movie in your head to really get the full impact of the ending. Get Out. This whole white family is murdered and the only survivor is a blood-soaked black guy in the uppity suburbs. Seriously, good movie. One of the best I've seen in years. But I left the theater and the first thing I said to my husband was, that investigation is not going to go well for him. Donnie Darko. Clearly, there are multiple people in that universe who have succumbed to an unfortunate fate they have no control over in order to save the world. The Road to El Dorado. There's a decent chance that Miguel and Tulio carried germs to the city that the natives have no immunity against. And there's an extremely high chance that Shell will pick something up if they take her back to Europe, or to any of the other colonies. The Never-Ending Story. Read the title. It's gonna come back around again, and worse, on an infinite loop, long after you switched that VHS tape out and went to bed. That gut-wrenching scene with the horse near the start, doomed to repeat. Beauty and the Beast. They had to start their life together without any furniture in that entire castle. Not having any furniture isn't that big of a deal. Considering all the servants were turned into furniture, I think the West Wing being full of shredded corpses is a bigger problem. Dirty Dancing. It ends on a happy note, but we all know they're not able to be together after the family leaves. My girlfriend in high school loved that movie, and every time she made me watch it, at the very end I always said, and they never saw each other again. The one that annoys me the most, even if I really enjoyed the movie, is Kingsman. The villain succeeded. Imagine living in a world where electronics can cause rage-inducing feelings. People would be abandoning technology in a world that isn't prepared for that. I mean, sure, people can romanticize living in the Wild West or hunter-gatherer, but there's a reason why people weren't considered adults until 13-ish. They didn't know how to succeed in that life until 10 years or so of training. Now you're dumping the entire Western technocrat society into such a state. They can't survive. On top of this, if Sam Jackson's penetration into various world leaders is as ubiquitous as it seemed, that also means that there was no one left to take command of the chaos. He didn't target just politicians, but performers and celebrities too. With people jokingly saying how The Rock should run for office and how people praise Schwarzenegger's reign as congressman, it's obvious that charismatic celebrities can use that to obtain positions of power. Except they're all dead. Anybody who lived on the East Coast from the Great Blackout back in 2003 would remember how tense things were after a few days. Now, instead, there's no one figuring out how to turn the lights back on. Plus, there isn't a few days of grace before people get violent. The violence has already happened. So, to set the stage, you have a population that just began attacking each other from technology. When they stop and look around, some old rivalries might have been reignited. On top of this, people are going to drop technology and live a life they're not prepared for. There will be no leadership or voice due to their eradication, which means that people are going to have to determine who's a leader. That is rarely peaceful. I know that there's a Kingsman too, but let's be honest, this is probably how things would have played out. Michael Banks from Mary Poppins is exactly the right age to grow up and be killed in the First World War. Passengers. Even if you ignore the Stockholm-driven relationship, the couple spent decades filling the spaceship with plants. Plants. As the roots of those trees grow, there's a massive risk of them rupturing vital supply lines. Or even worse, making a hole that leads out into the vacuum of space. Plant roots will push through concrete. That spaceship is beyond screwed. If humidity in the air was increased, there's also a huge amount of rusting that could happen. And that's ignoring that the couple spent decades eating the food supplies. The food supplies were supposed to be enough for a few thousand people for a few months. 2 people eating into that for decades, plus everything that got wasted during the film, means that inventory is massively depleted. Basically, if you woke up on that ship, there's a really good chance you'd die, either of starvation or the ship degrading because of all that plant life. The 2 main characters put 5,000 lives in serious jeopardy. Frozen. Number 1, the queen very likely can't sleep with her husband without killing him. Therefore, she can't breed. And even if she can, who knows what kind of mutant baby she'd spawn. Number 2, Anna can't marry Kristoff if the traditions of royalty in that country follow the vast majority of royalty traditions I've ever heard of. And number 3, the country was frozen over for at least a week or 2 with thick snow in the middle of growing season. Those people are gonna starve to death. I won't lie, I never thought about the food situation in Frozen. You're probably right there. War games. I've always been curious what happens to Lightman after the WOPR decides that the only winning move is not to play. He obviously had such a big role in helping to avert nuclear war that they had to let him go. But how do you release a 17-year-old back into the world after seeing all of that top secret stuff? My personal headcanon? McKittrick releases David with no charges, telling him in so many words, "Thanks for your help, don't hack anymore, but go study computer science at university. You might have a promising career ahead of you." Django Unchained. Sure, he's an amazing gunslinger at the end of the film, but he's in the South, pre-Civil War. He just killed a prominent plantation owner and everyone on the plantation. Just the sight of an African American on a horse stopped people in their tracks. And that was with Schultz claiming to be somewhat of a master. But now it's just him and his wife. I'd like to add I love this movie, but if you think about it, after what happened in Django, I can't see him lasting long. Trainspotting. Even though Mark is totally supposed to be an anti-hero, you find yourself rooting for him throughout the film. After he screws the other guys over and is literally running away from all his problems, declaring that he's going to change his life for the better, you think just for a second that he was being honest, until you realize that he's a heroin addict with a duffel bag full of cash. Logan. Even though the kids get away, Laura will eventually be like her dad, the Wolverine, with her body and healing factor weakening as she gets older due to the adamantium in her. Cue a whole bunch of arguments in the comments under this post right now. Risky Business kind of sets Tom Cruise's character up for terrible decisions because he gets away with everything. Alien Resurrection. The size of that explosion as the spaceship hits Earth indicates major atmospheric turmoil, dust being whirled up, etc., akin to a nuclear winter. Goodbye crops worldwide. The Graduate. I thought it was a happy ending until my history teacher explained what their expressions on the bus at the end meant. Those two are basically screwed. No job, no car, no money, no family. Jurassic World. Frustrated me that the main characters literally walked off into the sunset. No, don't turn this into a happy ending. Hundreds of people died. And can you imagine the lawsuit that's gonna happen? My personal opinion, none of the Jurassic Park movies are worth watching after the first one. In Kill Bill, Beatrix kills him, but probably has a ton of assassins who are constantly trying to kill her now. And now she has a daughter. Things will just get more complicated. For this one, there's also the much-loved fan theory that the little girl from the first one will come back and try to kill Beatrix eventually. I kind of like that idea for a sequel, if they ever decide to do one. Elysium. Nice. Make people live longer in an already dangerously overpopulated world. Can't wait for the food shortages, power shortages, water shortages, and so on. Yeah, I don't know if they really thought that one through. Transcendence. Will uploads the virus to save Max. This instantly bricks the world's computers and deletes the internet. There's definitely going to be major implications because of this. Ghost. Patrick Swayze happily goes off to ghost heaven, having just sentenced Demi Moore to a life of solitude and celibacy because she knows he's waiting for her. Gravity. For a start, she's stuck miles from anywhere, weak, no map, shoes, food, or drinkable water. And even if the capsule is sending out an alert, there's no reason to assume it would be picked up, as there's no satellites to get the signal. Plus, the Chinese, whose Soyuz it was, would probably assume it was empty, because for some reason there was nobody on their space station. A lot of Ewoks died due to the raining debris from a recently obliterated Death Star shortly after the end of Return of the Jedi. It seemed like Jesse got a happy ending at the end of Breaking Bad, until you think about how his fingerprints are definitely all over that meth lab. Did Jesse get a happy ending? I don't know, dude had it pretty rough. The Island. You just released a couple thousand burdens to the state, crippled an enormous company, destabilized the economy, and put thousands of people out of work. Not to mention the unfathomable legal complications of having a couple thousand clones running around. Whenever I watch this movie, I definitely have that same thought, that there's definitely gonna be some problems now that a bunch of rich and famous people's clones are running around the world. Harry Potter. Okay, so Voldy's dead, but now you have a world which is split down the middle and in a huge mess. People died over the year and in the Battle of Hogwarts. The Ministry would be so ruined from the year of management, and employees would be turning on one another. The wizarding world of Britain would need to rebuild from the ground up. Everything and everyone will be seeking recompense, and Harry would have a horrid time of it. He's the savior, and people will want to meet him, to thank him, to sob sad stories, and the families of the Death Eaters will either want to kill him or try to ask him to help their family members. Yeah, it would definitely be a bumpy road for the Ministry of Magic for quite a while after all the events that took place. Case 39. The monster is dead, but Emily's life is ruined. Her friends are dead. All potential witnesses are dead. Her friends and colleagues are gonna sue the pants off her and put her in jail because she killed an innocent girl who had already been through so much. Her career is as dead as the monster. There's nothing she can do to convince the society at large now, even though she saved them all. American Beauty always unsettled me because Kevin Spacey finally finds peace, but his daughter and her boyfriend next door are going to prison for his murder. Hitch. The dude lost his entire business and everyone is questioning their relationships. I'm not sure what he's gonna do with no work. The girl is a reporter who almost lost her job. I don't think she can take over payments for his place. Hey, Hitch is a pretty smooth guy. I'm sure he'll find some work somewhere. The Matrix Revolutions. The Oracle admits that the peace brought with Neo's sacrifice is only temporary. It was a crappy ending to begin with, though. Deep Impact. There's no way the world was peaceful, despite that rousing speech from Morgan Freeman. The Golden Compass. In the movie, the characters look into the blazing sunset while the music swells. In the book, a boy is ripped apart under the cover of darkness, perhaps 12 hours or less later. Ponyo. The world is really messed up by the events of the movie. Ponyo gets to be human and to be with her love, but the world is put back to the Dark Ages, with most of it underwater and prehistoric sea life roaming the waters. All farming is destroyed, no satellites, industry drowned. When the petrol available is consumed, what then? Hairspray. The main characters get together, but Tracy was still wanted by the police for assault and evading arrest. She was definitely caught when the cameras turned off. Training Day. There's no way the three wise men and Alonzo's crew would have let Jake live after what he's seen. Drop Dead Fred. The imaginary friends are sent to children to overcome problems in their lives. Fred is sent to Mickey's daughter. What are her problems? And how come Mickey didn't recognize the name Drop Dead Fred, even though he remembered it from childhood earlier on? Independence Day. Can you imagine cleaning up after every major city in the world has been destroyed? Sure, the aliens are gone, but you still have to clean up 1 billion bodies and spend $1 gazillion trying to fix things. Groundhog Day. The guy has spent years living an essentially consequence-free existence. The switch to Iron Man mode is going to be jarring and probably fatal for him and/or people around him. Forrest Gump. When you realize that Forrest is left alone with Forrest Jr. to take care of, and that both of them are going to be coping with AIDS in a time that the disease was completely maligned. The Pursuit of Happiness. Everyone is all happy that Will Smith gets the job, but they all seem to forget it's just an internship, an unpaid internship. He's still broke. He's still homeless. A few weeks of no showers, bad sleep, and no food, and he'll be fired and back in the same position he was. Death Proof. All the women would be arrested, convicted, and imprisoned for that car chase where they hit other cars that ended with them beating a man to death when he was lying on the ground helpless. Step Brothers. The guys start to grow up and turn into exactly what they despised before, adult wage slaves. Running the karaoke business starts to get boring, so Brennan turns to drugs. As a result, his psychiatrist girlfriend leaves him, and he falls further into the throes of addiction. Dale is devastated when his father, Robert, passes away. The hijinks are over, and reality sets in for the brothers. They eventually fall out of touch with each other. Chris Kardashian continues to cyberbully them to their respective graves. Wow, you really brought a dark twist to a comedy movie there. Lawyers of Reddit, what was the least defendable case ever brought to you? Probably my client charged with statutory assault, multiple accounts, who impregnated his high school sweetheart's daughter after sleeping with said daughter from the ages of 13 to 15. He was 35 at the time of the birth. DNA in the form of a baby is strong evidence for the state. I had a client who won just shy of a 7-figure settlement in a personal injury case. She then dropped into my office to ask me to file a fee dispute against the attorney who represented her in the personal injury action. That attorney took a little over $260,000 on this case. If you're doing the math at home, this guy took a 27% fee on the type of case where 40% fees are common. Did a fantastic job because the woman got nearly $1 million, and then she turned around and tried to sue him to recover any of his fees. I rejected the case out of hand and then got an ethics complaint for discriminating against her. It kinda sounds like this lady just needs to take the win. She's being really greedy here. A woman wanted me to sue her previous lawyer for charging her a lot of money but producing almost no work to justify his fees. She gave me what she told me was the lawyer's total work product, a page printed off the internet for which she said she was charged thousands of dollars for legal advice. She had already brought a claim via my jurisdiction's disciplinary body for lawyers. She had lost and wanted to bring an appeal. The judgment kept referring to documents that I hadn't seen. I pushed her to give me everything, and she came in with multiple files full of immaculate legal work that totally justified the fees she was fighting. We told her to get lost, but she wasted a lot of my time before we realized she was full of it. So this guy ordered a pizza, and nowhere was it specified that the delivery was supposed to be done in under 30 minutes. But the guy assumed it because movies. The delivery arrived 1 hour later, and it wasn't even necessary to apologize. They brought him his order and an additional beef pizza. The guy wanted our firm to sue them because he's Hindu, doesn't eat beef, and apparently felt offended. You're really fishing for a lawsuit. Sounds like someone's just looking for some easy money. A friend of mine was in a case where a guy was accused of graffiti vandalism, among other things, and the conversation with the judge went like this. "Sir, did you make this graffiti?" "No, I did not, but it has your signature at the end." "Yeah, an artist has to sign his work." Case closed. Some people really need to learn to just keep their mouths shut. I worked in-house for a famous character company with a large fan base. A few crazies a year would call in. A guy called in claiming that we stole characters that he created and demanded to be compensated. I calmly asked them to provide more details so that I can determine whether this has any merit to it. He states he designed the characters himself and gave it to the well-known actual creator when he was a kid, and the creator pawned them off as his own. I asked him when he was born, and it's a good 20 years after these characters were actually created. I ask him to explain this, and he pivots and says he also created some other well-known famous characters and brands. Characters and brands that are not owned by my company. I kindly ask that if he wants to pursue anything to send us something in writing, and hang up. I figured if he wasn't going to do some really basic research on his own claim, he wasn't going to spend any time to write it up. Never heard from him again. My dad had a client who went on trial for being a felon in possession of firearms, possession of stolen property, burglary, and distribution of narcotics. The guy had multiple pictures of himself on Facebook holding guns, drugs, and cash, and had videos of himself both breaking into someone's house and stealing a gun, as well as selling hard drugs on several occasions. Despite my dad basically telling this genius he was going to prison either way and to plead for a reduced sentence, the dude still pled not guilty. We occasionally joke that the guy clearly wasn't competent to stand trial by virtue of being so dumb. Not my client, but my dad and the hospital he worked at was sued by a gentleman after he saved his wife's life. Here's the situation. Patient is pregnant with 8th child and miscarries. The fetus is removed, but the patient starts bleeding uncontrollably. The only option available is a hysterectomy. It was either that or she dies right there on the table. My dad gets called in to do the surgery, performs it successfully, and everyone's happy. Except it turns out the patient's husband is quite devout and beyond peeved that his wife can't have kids anymore. So he sued the hospital. No firm would represent him, and he ended up bringing proceedings himself. Went all the way to trial, and he lost hard. Yeah, that's an incredibly hard argument to make in court. There was no other option for your wife to live. Either way, she wasn't going to be giving you any more kids. It sounds like the husband is only upset because in his mind, he's now stuck with a wife who can't bear children. Instead of if she had passed away, he could have remarried. The whole situation is just gross. The client lived on a large riverfront block. She had a jetty for a boat. Her large tree fell over in a storm and landed mostly in the water, making it difficult to moor her boat. She wanted us to sue the government for not taking away her fallen tree. That tree's your personal property. You have to deal with it. It's not the government's. I represented a tree trimming company that went to the wrong address and cut down all the mature trees in that yard. The right address was 100 North X Street. The company went to 100 South X Street and just went straight at it, hacking away. I still have no idea why the insurance company didn't just settle that pre-suit. Not a lawyer, but I was a jailer, and I used to pull double duty as a bailiff. A guy stole a pickup truck and was later captured passed out behind the wheel, parked on a sidewalk surrounded by a ludicrous amount of drugs and guns. He had elected to represent himself because he wasn't done being stupid. His legal defense? Double jeopardy. You can't charge me for theft, drugs, and felon in possession of a weapon because I've already been convicted of all those charges before. In short, during his jury trial, he admitted to doing it, but explained with a smug grin that since he had already done time for the same charges from another case before that, he couldn't be prosecuted for them ever again. This is not how double jeopardy works, folks. He's in prison now for 20 years. If he'd taken legal counsel, he easily could have cut a deal for 5. Surely this guy understands the flaws in his own logic, right? Like, come on, you're gonna go to court with that? A dad in his 60s hadn't been paying child support for decades, and he owed more than $60K for 2 kids who were now adults. He was basically living at a farm in the middle of nowhere, so no one could find him. He worked for cash, so the money couldn't be garnished from anywhere. He then came into an inheritance which was deposited into his bank account and promptly confiscated by family maintenance. He wanted it back, apparently. The dude's just upset that he finally had to pay something. A lady was sacked by a large company. They had caught her embezzling money to fund a gambling habit. They had clear evidence the embezzling had occurred, and she didn't deny it. She sued the company for $300,000 for unfair dismissal. My sister's firm represented the company against this woman. The case was so easy, the firm gave it to my sister as her first ever solo attempt. My sister screwed it up, badly. Not only did she lose, the court awarded the woman $500,000 instead of the $300,000 she asked for. In the end, it was a good career move. The partners all knew her name and dropped into her office one by one to offer their sympathy. I would have loved to hear some more details on exactly how this went so bad. Worked in family law in California for like 2 years before deciding I'd hang myself if I didn't change career paths. In California, the obligation to pay spousal support or alimony ends when the recipient begins cohabitation with a new romantic partner. A guy who was positively getting ripped in half in his monthly payments came to my office and said he was aware of the rule about cohabitation and wanted to argue his point in court. You see, his ex was a narcissist. She was in love with and had begun cohabitation with herself. Her presence in her apartment should count the same as if it were a romantic partner there. He was bordering on begging me to take his money. I refused. Buddy, the lawyer's trying to do you a favor and save you some money. Just listen to him. My brother's a lawyer. His client took a backhoe, dug up a standalone ATM, and scooped it onto a flatbed truck. Then, and only then, noticed a security camera nearby filming everything. He got some black spray paint out of his truck, went up 2 inches away, really nice view of his face, and sprayed the camera lens. He insisted on pleading not guilty. I read a patent and told my bosses it was both invalid and infringed by no one. It had 10 means for elements in each patent claim that no one would practice, or that weren't supported in the written description. The partners, my bosses, new to patent litigation, sued on the patent anyway, using young, inexperienced, unseasoned attorneys in the firm. 3 years later, after billing the client millions of dollars, every defendant won by proving each claim either not infringed or invalid. Then, my employer appealed and billed the client another buttload of money, with a young attorney in charge of the appeal that didn't understand the underlying issues on any level, because he was a former teacher instead of a patent attorney. It was such a bad patent, no one would settle at any point in the case. My bosses were blood-sucking trolls. I quit for these and similar parallel reasons. The firm finally imploded. I'm a paralegal. Local guy in his 20s decides to go rob his dealer. He got the wrong apartment. When a college girl opened the door, he shot her and fled. She laid there for hours just out of reach of her cell phone and listened to it ring while her mom called. She lived. A neighbor found her. Now she's paralyzed from the neck down, and her face is very deformed. This is a small town. During the trial, the jury was shown just how strung out on drugs he was, and how he even bragged to a few friends that he shot someone. That's pretty hard to defend. He got 40-something years. The girl that drove him to and from the apartment was also given jail time. This one's just sad to hear, that someone innocent was hurt for no real reason. I had a guy who wanted me to sue the city because the city took too long to bust his neighbor's illegal garbage disposal business. The guy claimed his neighbor's house had mice because of the garbage truck that was parked there when it wasn't hauling garbage. He said the neighbor's mice were causing his house to have mice, reducing the value of his house so he couldn't sell it. I asked him how long he'd been trying to sell his house. He said he wasn't trying to sell it yet. I asked him what he had done about the mice so far. He said he tried to call the city to have them get rid of the mice, but the city refused. I asked when he reported the neighbor's illegal garbage disposal business. He told me he never reported it. The city just towed the garbage truck after the neighbor was arrested for some unrelated crime, a DUI. I asked the guy how he knew all this, and he said the neighbor and him were partners in the illegal garbage disposal business, and his neighbor's old lady told him about the arrest and the towed garbage truck. Like, dude, what do you want me to do in this situation? If you take this to court, you're just gonna go to jail too. Are you really thinking this through? I was representing an independent mortgage broker from a small town on the East Coast. One day, he just up and left without notifying his clients. Fast forward a few months later, and one of his former clients discovers significant mistakes in her residential mortgage paperwork that caused massive issues with the bank, costing thousands in legal fees to rectify. Naturally, she wants to recover damages. Only the broker can't be found. The office is boarded up for non-payment of rent. His house is up for sale, and nobody knows where he went. The only indication of his whereabouts was his Facebook profile. He was swimming with dolphins somewhere sunny with his teenage daughter, which infuriated the plaintiff. Fortunately, he'd paid his insurance up front and it hadn't expired, so he would be defended by us through the insurer. When I finally got in touch with him after around 2 months, he explained that he'd lost all interest in the profession about a year ago. Since then, he took on clients or helped existing ones, but with basically zero financial background checks and basically no regard for structure or timing of the transaction. He was rubber stamping everyone and everything. His work was so shoddy and his file management so poor that we basically had nothing to go on. He was dead to rights, and he didn't care at all. Then one day, he declared bankruptcy, signed the house over to a trustee, and got a short-term visa to live in Australia where his daughter was studying. We settled that one quickly as he had no intentions of returning for trial, and we'd probably never be paid. I mean, hey, at least it's over quickly, I guess. We had a client skip bail and run. I looked him up on Facebook and he had posted a photo of the bond paperwork and a bunch of $20 bills. The post read something like, "Man, F the law and my bondsman. Can't nobody tell me nothing." Blah, blah, typical hood stuff. We live in BFE, Texas. Dude is not a gangster. Anyways, he didn't realize that the only reason we bonded him was because we were going to represent him. We withdrew the bond and the case. In the motion to withdraw, we quoted his Facebook post and attached a copy of it as Exhibit A when we filed it. I have a relative who's a lawyer. She worked for a hospital on a wrongful life case that was pretty miserable. The plaintiff had given birth to a baby with very severe congenital deformities. The plaintiff sued every health professional she saw while pregnant, claiming that if they had told her about the deformities, she would have aborted. A quick look at medical records shows that the plaintiff never really pursued prenatal care. She went to a local emergency room very early in her pregnancy to get a pregnancy test, apparently common in impoverished communities, and she later returned to that same ED a month later with abdominal pain. The ED doc did an ultrasound on her belly and determined the fetus was not in distress, but he didn't do a thorough exam because he wanted to figure out where the belly pain was coming from, not do an organ scan like an OB would. But she sued that hospital. Then she was arrested for check fraud and saw a physician in jail. But she didn't tell that doc about her pregnancy, so he didn't do an ultrasound at all. But she sued whoever provides that healthcare. The jail, maybe? It's just a sad case that the hospital won handily. This one's a little more messed up, but it's come up a couple times now. If you haven't done your own due diligence and had the problem trying to be taken care of properly through the correct channels, it's really hard to take anything to court. It's hard to place that blame on someone else when you didn't put in any of the work to prevent it in the first place. I represent condo and homeowners associations. One of my condo association clients wanted to evict some tenants because they were fat. I'm not even joking. Now, the law does, in some cases, allow the association to evict non-owner tenants. This is very fact-specific, however. I spent a long time trying to elicit from my client exactly what these tenants were doing that warranted eviction.
Well, they're just disgusting people. They're fat.
You can't evict someone just because they're fat. We didn't end up filing suit. My dad was a patent and trademark attorney about 10 years ago and worked for a pharmaceutical company. The owner of the company adopted the slogan, "Just do it," not knowing that the trademark belonged to Nike. When the owner found out that the trademark belonged to one of the biggest companies in the world, rather than change the slogan and avoid a lawsuit, he calls up Nike and expresses how funny he thinks it is that they have the same slogan. My dad got them to settle the case, and the catchphrase was later changed. The guy literally just called up Nike to say, "Hey, sue me." Luckily, I was on the other side of one of these ridiculous cases. I live in an area where liquor licenses are extremely valuable commodities. They can be transferred from one person to another, which is often easier than convincing a municipality to issue you a new one for your bar or restaurant. My client was opening up a new restaurant and found some wackadoo who had a liquor license that he wasn't using. I believe his bar previously folded. He agreed to sell his license to my client for about $250,000. The contract had a minor notice provision, something like you have to send notice of whatever in 7 days. My client's former lawyer dropped the ball and sent it in 10 days. Now the wackadoo received full payment but decided that because this minor notice provision was breached, he was entitled to keep both the license and the money. There's a doctrine of law called material breach of contract, which in a nutshell means you can only sue for breach of contract if the breach materially impacts your contract rights. For example, if my client had failed to pay for the license, that would be a material breach of contract. But getting a notice document 3 days late when full payment had already been made? Yes, it is a technical breach of contract. But no court in the United States of America would deem that to be a material breach. And certainly no court would let the wackadoo keep the license and the money. So we sued the wackadoo who represented himself. He fought okay for a pro se, but the judge of course ruled against him because his position was crazy. The wackadoo kept the money and my client got the license. In law school doing legal aid, my client was charged with uttering threats. He said something like, "I'm gonna put you 6 feet underground," to his ex-girlfriend, while brandishing a large knife. His defense was that yes, he said it, but he wasn't uttering threats. He just wanted to scare her into legitimately thinking he was going to kill her, because at the time he was angry and he wanted her dead. He thought this was a full defense. Dude, what are you doing? We were defending a hostile workplace claim. I'm speaking with the manager who allegedly threatened violence against the plaintiff. I tell him one of the allegations is that he threatened to kill the plaintiff during his annual review. The manager says, "No way. All I did was..." He opens his desk drawer and places a pistol on the desk in front of me. "Was put this gun on the table. It wasn't even pointed at him." A woman was getting sued following a car accident. I asked her what happened. She said, "Well, I meant to hit the brake, but accidentally hit the gas and rear-ended them." Well, crap, I'm not winning that one. As a former public defender, I'd say roughly 50% of the cases assigned to me were completely undefendable, typically because of some combination of video evidence, police wear body cams where I was practicing, multiple credible eyewitnesses, my client's name and driver's license on a pawn ticket for stolen goods, or my client just straight up admitted to the police that they did it. I don't want to get into specifics because of attorney-client privilege, but I had a few clients who, at our initial meeting, would say they were innocent. It's all a big misunderstanding, and so on. Then I'd show them a video of the police busting in their trailer. Client is on top of his significant other beating the crap out of her with 2 children under 5 present, and then proceeds to fight with the police and ends up getting tased and peeing himself. We could have won that one if only being on lethal amounts of bath salts was a defense. My firm had a guy call in about their son getting hurt at school and them wanting to sue. The kid dislocated his shoulder and brings a doctor's note to sit out. The kid decides screw it and plays anyway. Dislocates shoulder again and now needs surgery. Dad wants to sue the school. This kid is 17 years old. Yeah, I hate to say it, but your kid needs to be making his own decisions at that point. At the age of 17, he should have a little bit more interest in his own well-being. This guy had this whole story about how the cops came into his house illegally without a warrant or consent. The story sounded really good, and I was excited to get the ball rolling. And he finished the 30-minute story up by telling me that he opened the door while cops and rival gangsters were outside, and fired a couple rounds before closing the door back up behind him. He thought that as long as he went home afterwards, he could do whatever he wanted and the police couldn't arrest him without a warrant. If you open your door and straight up start shooting at police officers, yeah, they're gonna come get you. They don't need a warrant. What fan theories have blown your mind with their devastating logic? I like the one about the Rugrats. Ever wondered how Angelica could talk to the babies? Angelica is the only one who can talk to the babies because they're a figment of her imagination. She's spoiled, sad, and lonely because her mother is constantly working and has no time for her. Her relationship with her dad is superficial and unsubstantial. No real love is ever shown to her. So how did it come about that Angelica would have to imagine these babies? Tommy died soon after childbirth, a fact reflected by Stu never leaving the basement, inventing toys that his son will never play with. Chucky died in the car crash along with his mum, also reflected in the actions of his father. The crash has made him a pathetic nervous wreck most of the time. Most interesting is Phil and Lil. There never were any twins. There was just one baby. However, this baby was a stillborn, and Angelica never knew the sex of the stillborn, so she invented twins of different genders. Sadly, Angelica never uses her imaginary friends to comfort or entertain her. Instead, she's mean and nasty to them. She's invented this relationship with these babies so that she can vent her frustrations on being a spoiled, lonely brat who has seen much hardship from these unfortunate parents. Frustrations that can't be satisfied by a typical childhood relationship with a doll, albeit a Cynthia one. You've definitely made me want to take a second look at that show now. I read a theory about Courage the Cowardly Dog that said Courage is actually a normal dog and he sees the world through a dog's eyes. All the villains in the show are just normal people, but to a little dog, they seem scary. They don't actually live in the middle of nowhere, but since his owners are too old to take him out for walks, he only knows what's around his immediate property, and everything beyond that is nothing because he's never seen it. The story of Aladdin is made up by the salesman at the beginning to persuade you to buy the lamp. This one isn't really a theory as much as it is kind of the way the movie goes. You just choose whether or not you want to believe the actual story. Doctor Who. The Doctor's name is a word of power, something that was introduced to the series in Moffat's Series 3 episode The Shakespeare Code. What does the Doctor's name do? It unlocks the Time War. This is the reason he trusts no one but himself to know his own name. During the ending of Forest of the Dead, the 10th Doctor also states to River that there could be only one way she could have known his name. This is also the reason why the Silents are terrified of the Doctor's name. And why not? It would release the Daleks and the Time Lord from the locked Time War. Willy Wonka knew those children would die in his factory. After Augustus gets sucked up the chute, they all hop on board the boat through the Tunnel of Doom. The boat doesn't have 2 extra vacant seats though. It was designed with prior knowledge that they would lose 2 participants before that point. Later, they drive a cream-spewing car with only 4 seats. Did they have another car waiting in the garage in case the others made it? Of course not. Willy Wonka uses children to make candy. You kinda took a dark turn at the end of that one there, but there's a lot of fan theories around this movie, and a lot of them do tend to be dark. I like the idea that at the end of The Thing in 1982, when Kurt Russell offers Keith David the bottle and he drinks out of it, that the bottle is actually filled with gasoline from one of the Molotovs he was throwing earlier. Since the creature wouldn't understand what gasoline tastes like, it wouldn't spit it out. The original Scooby-Doo series is set after a horrible economic depression. Everything is abandoned and falling apart, and all of the villains are people who would normally be really respected. Professors, museum curators, celebrities, who have fallen into hard times just like everyone else. How many times have the gang helped someone not go out of business? This one is my personal theory. That 70s show is a vague sequel to Happy Days. At the end of Happy Days, Richie and Ralph go off to the Korean War, or at least they're training for it. Fonzie stays behind. At this point, you must remember that the Fonz was always the person who kept Richie cool. Flash forward 20 years. Richie, now Red, has become bitter after the war, and without the catalyst that was Arthur Fonzarelli, his friendship with fool neighbor Bob, or Ralph, has fallen apart. Happy Days was made in the 70s and set in the 50s. That 70s show was in the 90s and set in the 70s. I do agree that 70s show was definitely trying to capture the same lightning in a bottle that Happy Days had, just for a newer generation. You're definitely onto a connection there in terms of audience appeal and general timeline, but I don't think that the characters carry over in any way. The existence of SpongeBob and his strange friends is the result of radiation from nuclear arms testing that was performed at the Bikini Atoll in the late 40s and early 50s. Since they live under the atoll, the town is known as Bikini Bottom. In the beginning of 2001: A Space Odyssey, a black screen is displayed while music plays for a few minutes before the film starts. It's believed that this is the monolith tilted 90 degrees and taking up the entire screen, as if the entire film is a technological and evolutionary advancement that Kubrick is bestowing us. Sean Connery's character in The Rock is actually James Bond. He got caught spying on America and was hidden away in various prisons. "This man does not exist in the United States or Great Britain," says FBI Director Womack. This ties in with the theories of James Bond being a code name for different agents. One that hasn't been brought up yet is Blade Runner. Ridley Scott finally closed the debate a few years ago as to whether or not Deckard was actually a replicant, and he totally was. But to take this one step further, he was a replicant implanted with the memories of Gaff, Edward James Olmos's character. Gaff was actually the top Blade Runner, but was sidelined due to some injury or illness, hence the cane. So Deckard was created and implanted with Gaff's memories to continue the search for Roy Batty and his friends. This explains why Gaff never really does anything aside from drive Deckard around, and why he treats him with such contempt. Gaff's origami also hint at Deckard's true nature, as they seem to demonstrate an insight into what Deckard is feeling. A chicken when he's feeling scared, a stickman with a boner when he's about to meet the smoking hot Rachel, and the unicorn from Deckard's recurring dream. It also helps explain the compliment Gaff pays Deckard at the end of the film. After he apparently hovered above the building and watched Batty nearly kill Deckard without intervening, he lands and says, "You've done a man's job," which is the highest praise you could give a replicant. When it's all laid out like that, I hardly even think it should be considered a theory. It's just clearly what was going on if you take a few minutes to think about it. Okay, let's be honest, Blade Runner is kind of a mess. There's way too many different cuts, and as a result, we have all kinds of fan theories coming up around this one. Always that Deckard's a replicant, which apparently was confirmed that I didn't know. Personally, my favorite book of all time is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is the book that this movie is based off of. If you have a remote interest in Blade Runner, take all this conspiracy stuff, put it off to the side, and read the book objectively, without taking all of this movie stuff into account. Deckard is a completely different character with completely different motivations in the book. The Jetsons and the Flintstones are two portions of the same society. The people living in Bedrock are actually members of a far future society, one may say post-human, that have rejected the day-to-day electronic assistants to live like their long-dead ancestors did, or at least what they think they lived like. This explains the talking animals. They're just synthetic creations. It's been so long since any actual animal lived that didn't have human communication bred and written into it that the ferals don't realize how silly it is to be talking with creatures that didn't even exist alongside early humans. How Garfield is actually dying of starvation, and just imagine John and Odie. There was a reference to this in a Halloween-themed comic. Garfield woke up in a condemned and abandoned house. He calls out for Odie and John, but there's no answer. He then wills the illusion back on himself, and continues his delusions about his family. To all you Potterheads out there, when Sybil Trelawney predicted Harry was born in midwinter, she was laughed at, as Harry's birthday was in July. However, it is a known fact that, spoiler alert, Voldemort's soul is inside Harry. It's possible that Professor Trelawney was detecting the part of Voldemort inside Harry as Voldemort was born mid-December. Pinky and the Brain. One is a genius, the other's insane. Brain constantly plans to take over the world, suggesting he's insane. Pinky often finds ways to ruin these plans. So, who is the genius? You just gave me a whole new appreciation for Pinky. I remember there was a pretty good one about how R2-D2 was Luke's father, and this of course was before Empire Strikes Back came out. Luke's father was mortally wounded by Vader. His brain was removed from his body and placed in life support inside a robot. This is why C-3PO is so worried about R2's operational status. C-3 knows that R2 has biological components. Turns out, Luke, who got very little Jedi training, isn't all that great. It's his Jedi father inside of R2 every time. Think about it. Early on, when Luke does something with the Force, R2 is always there, except for the one time on Hoth. And what is R2 doing at that time? Deploying a long-range Force antenna we never see again. This one is obviously completely invalidated by, 30 years of the franchise now, but I thought it was fun. Archer TV show. Whenever someone eats at the Chinese restaurant and brings home a tinfoil swan full of leftovers, they're going to betray the company. Episode 1, when Archer wants to break into the mainframe and erase and alter his financial records. Episode 9, Lana is going to join Odin. And there's an episode where Cyril takes a bribe at the restaurant and his bribe money is in the swan. I'm pretty sure this theory is out there somewhere else, but I've yet to find it. In the beginning of Finding Nemo, the father imagines one son survived when in reality his whole family was destroyed. The movie is an allegory of the father's journey through the stages of grief. Denial. He won't let his son go to school because it's not safe. Anger. He scolds his son for venturing out of his control. Bargaining. He puts up with an amnesiac travel buddy to help him find his son. Despair. He sees his son flush down the drain. Acceptance. He learns to let go and let things be the way they are. Almost everyone in the story tells the father he has to let go of his son. His travels take him to the land down under, aka the underworld. The movie ends with him saying goodbye as his son visually disappears into the void. And the kicker? Nemo means nobody in Latin. Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Will was murdered on the basketball court in West Philly. The taxi driver is God. That's why we felt the cab was different or rare. God takes him to heaven where he lives in a mansion with his wealthy aunt and uncle and slowly works out his issues and hardships. At the end of Kevin Smith's Dogma, Bethany Sloan, the last scion, i.e. God's chosen to continue his good works on earth as a last resort should there need to be one, is saying goodbye to the 13th apostle, a gentleman named Rufus. During this final exchange, before he returns to heaven, Rufus suggests that Bethany name her son after him. She scoffs, but the idea is implanted. Now let's assume that Bethany Sloan, the last scion, names her son, the new last scion in the bloodline, Rufus, after taking his suggestion to heart. Does anyone know anyone from the future that is charged with saving humanity as we know it that is named Rufus? How about Rufus from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure? That's right, Rufus from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure is the last scion, sent back in time by God to save Earth by teaming up with an unlikely band of teenage heroes and historical figures. This is why I consider Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure a part of the View Askew universe. George Carlin also happens to be in both movies, but I'm not sure if I can come up with a link between those two. And in case someone mentions that Rufus was sent back in time from the year 26XX or something, keep in mind it could still be him. Time travel, you know? Or he could just be a part of Rufus as the last scion bloodline that goes all the way into the extreme future. Back to the Future. The Doc is ready to kill himself along with Marty in that parking lot during the first time travel scene. Not only has he never tested the time machine, but he claims that many of his inventions have been failures. So during the moment when he's about to find out if his life's work was a huge success or a complete waste, he not only drives the DeLorean towards himself, but also grabs onto Marty when he tries to run away. If that first time travel test was a failure, they both would have been killed, which is exactly what Doc wanted had the experiment been a failure. You know, when you lay it out like that, it does make sense, but I always prefer to think of Doc as more crazy than sad. In My Neighbor Totoro, Totoro is the god of death. Here are my points. 1. It's saying that Totoro is in fact a messenger of death, and whoever sees him will soon die. The hospital that the sister's mother was in was based on a real hospital for terminally ill patients. Number 2, later in the story, the villagers find a slipper in a pond, which is in fact Mei's. At this point, she's already drowned in the pond. Satsuki lied that the slipper wasn't Mei's out of denial. From this scene forward, the sisters appear to have no shadow. Number 3, Satsuki pleaded to Totoro and the cat bus to take her to where Mei is. While on the cat bus, she says, "Nobody can see us." This scene is Satsuki leading herself to the land of the dead by taking the cat bus. Number 4, at the hospital, the mother says, "I think I feel Mei and Satsuki smiling there in that tree." Why don't the sisters go and see their mom if they're already there? Why do they just leave the corn there instead? It's said that the sisters were dead at that point, and the Japanese pronunciation of corn is similar to kill child. Number 5, the final scenes seem to be a happy epilogue, but they in fact happened before the major events of the movie. And finally, the movie was set in a place in Japan where there was a case of a murdering of 2 sisters which happened in the 1960s. This event took place on May 1st, while the sisters' names are Satsuki, Mei in Japanese, and Mei in English. In the real-life case, the younger sister was missing first, and the older sister was seen to be looking for her frantically. The next day, the younger sister's body was found in the forest. The older sister was in such a state of shock and kept rambling ambiguous words about seeing a cat monster or a great big raccoon monster to the police. The sisters were in fact from a single-parent family as well. The mother died of illness. An alternate theory I hear a lot is that there are no children. They can't have kids because of the wife's illness, and the father in his loneliness is writing in his diary about the kids he wished he had. He's often seen writing throughout the movie. In Inception, Leonardo DiCaprio's character is in the real world in the ending scene. He talks about how totems only work for specific people. The top was his wife's totem. It wouldn't work for him. His totem is his wedding ring. In the dream world, his wife is alive, and he's still married to her. Therefore, he wears his wedding ring. In all the scenes in the real world, his wife is dead, and he's no longer married. Because of this, he doesn't wear his ring. In the last scene, he isn't wearing his ring. Time to rewatch Inception and pay far too close attention to Leo's left hand. There's a theory in Ferris Bueller's Day Off that Cameron invented Ferris and he's living out what Cameron wishes he could be. Makes the movie mind-blowing. In Kill Bill, the bride doesn't kill Bill. First, you have to put her rampage in chronological order. She wakes up in the hospital, kills Buck, flies to Japan, kills everyone in the tea house, then comes back to the States to kill Vernita Green. We know this because O-Ren's name is already crossed off the list when she parks outside Vernita's house. In the process of killing Green, she accidentally does so in front of her young daughter. Her immediate reaction is shame. She tries to hide the knife behind her leg. From that point on, she doesn't kill anyone else. Bud dies from a snake bite. Daryl Hannah's character has her eye plucked out but is still alive. Then we get to Bill. They tell the story of the 5-point palm fist of death technique, but in the training sequences, it's never shown that she learns it. We're specifically told that Pai Mei never taught it to anyone. The other part that's suspicious is the play acting. When Beatrix first runs into the house, there's a play scene with her daughter. They pretend to shoot her and she pretends to be dead. This is what Bill does. At the end of the film, Beatrix is curled up on a bathroom floor crying, "Thank you, thank you." Who is she thanking? Bill, for letting her go. It was the only way for either of them to exit the situation gracefully. During the end credits, each of the people on the list who died gets a line through their name. Daryl Hannah is marked with a question mark because she was left alive. But Bill? Bill's name isn't marked at all, because they never killed Bill in Kill Bill. In The Matrix, people aren't used as an energy source. That's physically impossible, as it would take more energy to keep people alive than you'd get out of them. It's just the misinformation humans have. The machines were built to care for humans, and they're still going about that task. The machines think they're giving humans a better and more peaceful life. When people escape and try to free themselves, they're actually being let into another level of the Matrix. The machines realize some people need to strive and think that they're important, so they construct a false reality in which they can do so. The Sopranos. The guy in the members-only jacket walked out of the bathroom and killed Tony in front of Carmela and Anthony. It's the reason why the screen cuts to black. In a previous episode, Bobby asks him what he thinks death is like, and Tony says, "I bet it just cuts to black." The symbolism was pretty much hitting you over the head. How the family was posed like the Last Supper, how Tony was eating an orange earlier, how the episode where Tony was shot earlier was titled Members Only, how we kept hearing bells all through the episode. He definitely got whacked. And like he said, he never heard it coming. In the first Alien film, I always thought that the Weyland-Yutani Corporation already knew about the aliens and were looking for them. Not really so much mind-blowing, but I think it makes the film more sinister and creepy. I really love the theory that in Inspector Gadget, the inspector we know is actually the second inspector, built as a completely robotic replacement after the first was lost in action. He was loaded with his old memories, and nobody would have been the wiser, except that the original Inspector Gadget didn't actually die. Upon returning from whatever disaster caused his bosses to give up on him as KIA, and now horribly disfigured, he discovers his replacement is living his life, even with his dog and raising his niece. The original inspector snaps and vows to devote the rest of his life to the destruction of the ungodly replacement. He disavows everything he once knew and loved, even going so far as to take a new name, Dr. Claw. After watching and reading Fight Club about 100 times, I'm fully aware that Marla Singer is also a figment of the main character's imagination. She's the living embodiment of everything he originally hates about himself, and by the end of the movie, he's able to live with it, as well as absorb what he needed out of Tyler. If you watch it in this context, you'll see clear hints to this. The meetings stop working when the things he's running from follow him there, being Marla. He's screwing her as Tyler, the idealized version of himself, but as a half-disgust, half-envy thing going on as Jack. Those who went to a private school, what was the best rich kid meltdown you witnessed? I know a guy who didn't get into a college he really wanted to go to. Instead of accepting it, his parents spent millions to pay for a wing of a new building to be built. And after that, the college accepted him. He still had to pay full tuition after that too, $60K per year. My mom works at a prep school that I went to. Important to this story is the snowstorm that had been forecasted all week. As I'm putting together my bag of ski stuff in her office, her richest student showed up at the door. This kid is a billionaire, with a B, also sobbing his eyes out, like my leg is broken or my dog had just died crying. The problem was his dad's helicopter was grounded in New York City and not allowed to make the flight to their private jet in Teterboro, New Jersey. Instead, his dad would have to rent a limo to take him to a hotel in the area. This was delaying his trip to Belize or Cancun, and meant that he wouldn't get to start getting wasted for another 3 hours or so. And he was just so stressed. I was going to a normal public high school at the time. There was this girl in a youth group I was in who put everyone else down. She would go on and on about how much her parents loved her and how they loved her so much that she got to go to a fancy private school. She would really rub it in, too. Not having a good day, grades not so good, sick day. Well, if only your parents loved you enough to send you to a private school like mine do. It was annoying and hurtful to everyone. Well, one day I'm walking down the hall to my next class and I see the principal introducing a new student to the teacher. It was none other than this girl. Her folks must have gotten sick of her attitude and decided they needed to put her back into public school for an attitude adjustment. It sounds like this girl needed to be humbled a little. This was probably the right decision parentally. A bit of backstory, Sao Paulo has really crappy traffic, and rush hour is just miserable. Hours to go a few miles. So this girl who used to be nicer when she was younger became a total witch in high school. One day, her driver picked her up in the wrong car. It wasn't the Mercedes-Benz S-Class, but a mere normal car. She completely ignored him, refused to acknowledge he was there or waiting for her to get in the car. So that poor guy had to drive back to her house without her in the crappiest traffic imaginable to get the Benz. Drive back in the crappiest traffic imaginable to pick up a spoiled brat who started yelling at him for being incredibly late. I'm 100% sure he didn't drive the Benz in the first place because her dad forbade the driver from taking it. Ugh, God, I really do feel bad for that guy. I can't imagine having to put up with a child like that. I went to a boarding school in the late 90s, and I remember a girl in my Spanish class trying, unsuccessfully but at great length, to argue her way out of a tardy because Daddy's secretary forgot to call and wake me up this morning. Do private colleges count? If so, there was a rich girl from LA who went to my college and demanded a private apartment in one of the dorm buildings because she didn't want roommates. Shortly after, she decided she didn't want to stay in the dorms at all and had her parents rent her a house that was $7,500 a month. This was in San Francisco, so I'm pretty sure most of you can imagine how expensive things can be. I went to an expensive private school on a scholarship and was friends with this girl Samantha, whose mom had security cameras in every room of the house and would constantly spy on her. Also had monitoring programs on the computer, the whole 9 yards. My parents mentioned this to me once, and being a stupid kid, I told Samantha. The mom flipped her lid. I'm talking calling my parents several times a day to berate them, to the point where they had to block her number. I was never allowed over to her house again. Samantha and her friends bullied me relentlessly for the rest of the year. It was pretty traumatic, honestly. I didn't understand what was going on because I thought I was doing the right thing by telling her. This one doesn't feel fair to our original poster. They were just trying to give you a heads up that you're being spied on. For all of that to blow back in your face like that kind of leaves you not wanting to help people again in the future. I went to boarding school for 2 years. I was on a scholarship and most of the other girls were trust fund babies. They'd go skiing in Europe. Every week, they'd go on shopping sprees at the mall and make room in their closets by throwing out brand new, still with tags outfits. I didn't have money to go shopping, but I loved those days because I could pick through the new clothes in the trash cans and find beautiful things for me and my sister. One day, one of the snottier rich girls found me looking through the garbage and said some horrible things about how I was a trash picker, poor, and other stuff I've blocked out. I hid from class for 2 days because I was so embarrassed. A few months later, I was in the study hall late at night. Going back through the hallways to my room, I heard her sobbing in the hall. I almost walked right by, but I felt really bad for her. I stopped to ask her what was wrong, and she blurted out that her parents were divorcing. Then she realized who I was and started getting all rude. I gave her some Kleenex from my bag and told her I was sorry that was happening to her. Then I walked away. She wasn't super nice to me ever, but I think she got a little bit nicer after that, especially when her buddies weren't around. Honestly, it sounds like they're the stupid ones. You were getting brand new clothes for free. Let them call you all the names you want. You're getting high-end stuff for free? I'm not gonna complain. I went to an all-women's private college. My second-year roommate was a disaster. Screamed on the phone as loud as possible with her parents if they didn't send her $5,000 a week. She wanted a new snowboard and had spent her $5,000 on going out and God knows what. She had a total meltdown in the hallway of the dorm, screaming that her parents didn't really care about her. I can't impress upon you how loud she was screaming. I was like, if I could get $50 a month, I was thrilled. But my parents never sent me money ever. How are you blowing through $5,000 a week? And even with that incredibly generous allowance, you still call and ask for more money instead of waiting until next week? Not exactly a meltdown, but a behavior issue. This kid was the senator's son, and in my history class behind me, he always acted entitled, and the teacher even praised his father like he was God. We get our test grades back, and he happens to see that I got a really good grade. For some reason, as we were passing our tests up the row for the teacher to recollect, he says, "Pick these up by yourself, nerd," and throws them all across the floor in front of me. This was in high school. I hadn't witnessed such a cheap way of bullying since elementary school. Ugh, this kid really just sounds like he plays up to all the stereotypes. My mom was an English teacher at a private school that I also went to, but her stories always seemed to be more intense than mine. Once, she was teaching a particularly badly behaved class, trying to get them to keep quiet and do the assigned work. This one stubborn kid decided that the best response was to say, "Why should I have to listen to you? My parents pay your salary." She flipped her lid, and that kid barely spoke for the rest of the year. This isn't from me, but my mom, who was a teacher at a private school. Just prepare yourself. So for this kid's 18th birthday, he gets this sweet red Porsche, which he drives to school. He doesn't need it to drive to school because he lives literally a 30-second walk away on the estate where the houses start at about £3 million each. But he does it anyway because he's a tool. Because this beautiful car must not be forced to mingle with the commoner cars of the other 6th form students, he's given permission to park it in the staff car park, which is still commoner cars but on a secured lot. Around a week later, he's showing off to his friends by fooling around in his car in the staff car park, and slams the passenger side of his car into the back of a staff car. The staff car is an old Jeep from the 90s, so it's not the least bit disturbed or dented from having a sports car wrapped around it. No one was in the passenger side, and the driver was fine, but the car itself looked like a really expensive boomerang. Of course, the kid starts screaming and crying and complaining, threatening all sorts of legal action. My mom was his head of year at the time, so he comes running to her demanding something be done. But she does everything but outright laugh in his face and tells him he's on his own. The next day, my mom comes into work and some very irate and powerful parents are waiting in her office, demanding to know why the school wasn't doing anything about the fact a staff member had crashed into their son's car, and threatening to press criminal charges if the school didn't pay up. The kid's there with a massive grin on his face, but this isn't my mother's first rodeo. Oh no, she's prepared. Oh? Well, that's not what the staff member said happened. Let's review the CCTV, shall we? Obviously, the kid is now bricking it, and the parents agree to watch, knowing they'll be vindicated. Of course, it shows the kid donutting around in his car before smashing into the Jeep. The parents slowly turn to the kid. The kid starts ranting and raving. Honest to God, full breakdown. My mom was worried an ambulance would have to be called to commit this child. Eventually, the parents agreed to pay for any damages to the staff's car. The kid got a new car, but it was something like a third-hand Ford Ka, and he wasn't allowed to drive it to school anymore. It got even better when the next year, his brother came into the 6th form and got a sweet ride, and told my mom that that original jerk had been banned from driving it, as well as the parents' new cars, after he also crashed his Ka. This is a perfect example of why you don't get your kids this age stuff that's very expensive. At the end of the day, they just end up ruining it. I'm sorry, you can't be trusted. We know you want to show off to your friends, but you can do that in a Ford. You don't need to do it in an expensive Porsche. I briefly attended a private school for about 3 years. A girl that had been going there since kindergarten received a low grade on a Spanish test and went off on the teacher about it. She got her parents involved in everything and ended up transferring schools because the teacher wouldn't adjust her grade. Is that really worth all the trouble involved? Like, spend an extra night studying Spanish. You'll be fine. I went to a normal high school, but I remember there was a rich girl that lost it one day because one of her nails broke on her manicured hand, and she called her mom to come get her so she could get it fixed immediately. The school was okay with it because they didn't want to hear her whining about it anymore. It wasn't a private school, rather a public school in a very wealthy town. We really did have the best of everything at my school. My family's fairly wealthy. Some of the kids I grew up with, though, were heirs to vast fortunes. Insurance, DuPont, sports empires, etc. I was sitting in the lobby at my high school. This girl had just gotten the ultra-exclusive Dolce & Gabbana Motorola Razr. She was going on and on about how exclusive it was. This other girl rounds the corner and was like, "Oh my god, I just got the same phone." The first girl looked like she was gonna choke her out. She got the girl to hand her her phone and said, "Poor girls like you don't deserve fashion accessories like this," and snapped her phone in half. The other girl took it unbelievably well. I actually became friends with her after that. Turns out that she was not poor at all. Her mother was one of the heirs to the Sears fortune, and her father was a bigwig at Motorola. The best part is that she got her father to give her 50 of these stupid gold Dolce & Gabbana phones, and handed them out a few days later to a bunch of kids at school. I still have mine somewhere in the box. I appreciated the gift, but never used it. Shout out to the girl who single-handedly ripped the exclusivity of this phone out of this school. My sister cried as she got a laptop for Christmas. For the previous year, she wanted a laptop, but for this, she only wanted clothes. It was made better when my mom opened a "I love my rotten, ungrateful children" fridge magnet after my sister went upstairs. Currently in a very wealthy private school in Manhattan. Many are wealthy, and many aren't who are on financial aid, but culture in the school is to be pretty humble about wealth. A girl that actually just moved here was telling me about her $50 million trust fund and her daddy's private plane. She picks up her phone and I see a text from her mom. I look over and see what appears to be a long apology from her mom about something. I ask her what she's apologizing for. The girl explains that she went ape on her parents the night earlier for making her fly first-class commercial, but she was the one receiving the apology. I don't think I managed to stifle my laughing. Honestly, this is not funny. This girl's gonna grow up to be a horrible person. I used to work at a private alternative school for at-risk youth in the Northeast. Parents sent their kids there from all over the world and paid about $80K a year for their entitled kids to go there. Biggest meltdown I ever saw was from a kid who lived in my dorm. We had a status system so those on the lowest status couldn't have their personal electronics from the time they turned them in the previous night until about 6 p.m. the next day. This kid notoriously skipped class to play WoW all day long and simply refused to turn his electronics into me. His advisor finally convinced him that turning in his electronics was a better idea than not doing it, so he turned them into me. The kid came to me asking for his electronics a few hours too early, and I said no. Since this kid was 18, he threatened to drop out and literally walk home. This was in the middle of nowhere, and this kid lived about an hour or two away. I stood my ground and still said no, so he ran downstairs to his room to pack his things. I called the admin on duty and he came and determined it was a situation for the headmaster to get involved. He also came and the kid threw enough of a hissy fit that they both came to me asking for the electronics. I handed them over and the kid calmed down, but it didn't end there. He decided he needed revenge. So one night, he and another student decided that they would spray my car with a fire extinguisher. The only reason I know it was him was because my advisee managed to get a video of it. The guy who was the head of the dorm next to mine was a volunteer firefighter. So he said to me the next morning, "Hey man, looks like your car got sprayed with a fire extinguisher." I didn't think anything of it, but he continued with, "That stuff will melt the paint off your car and etch your windows. You need to go wash it now." So I booked it to the nearest car wash and spent about $100 to save my paint. Luckily, the school reimbursed me and charged the family of the two kids for the cost of the wash. We're in a small town with one major manufacturing chain which pretty much owned everything in town. It recently moved its headquarters out of state and had an IPO. Anyway, the owning family, we'll call them Schmidt, had a Stanford-bound son who was attending the same driver's ed class as my sister, who had no idea who he was. Anyway, my sister, who entertains herself by persistently slightly annoying or flirting with random people, happened to make super rich Stanford-bound teen the object of her flirting. She flicked a tiny piece of paper at him, played with his hair a bit, and he says, "I'm Adam Schmidt," as if to say, "How dare you?" My sister had no idea that was supposed to mean something and just smilingly said, "Hi," then went back to flicking tiny paper balls at him. "I'm Adam Schmidt," he repeated. My sister was still undeterred. This went on for a while when he finally shouted in class, "I'm Adam Schmidt. Don't you know who my father is?" We looked him up after. Turns out he was a pretty big deal, and that phrase probably would have played really well with lots of people in our town. But to us? I had a rough time in public elementary school, so I went to a private Catholic school for middle school. I'm Jewish, but they let me attend. No doubt for the tuition, and just had me go to the computer lab when we did religion class or went to mass. One girl there hated me, just straight up would make fun of me because I was poor. My family was solidly middle class, so no. Or because my mom was an Eastern European immigrant and speaks with a thick accent. Or because I was a Jew. First time I had anti-Semitic crap hurled at me was from this little witch. Because I didn't have to sit through mass and got to play Oregon Trail instead. So my bat mitzvah comes around and my teacher decided to use it as a learning moment for the class. I explained what it was, that I get to have a big party and the whole thing. Of course, a bunch of 12 and 13-year-olds are going to be into it. Especially since I was the only Jew any of them were actually close with. The attention was off her, and she was getting more and more annoyed with it all. The Monday after my party, when everyone was talking about it, she threw a huge fit in the parking lot after school when her mom picked her up, because she wouldn't let her have a bat mitzvah. Apparently she had asked, and her mother had said, "We're not Jewish, and you're having a sweet 16 in a few years, so no." She lost it and had a meltdown because she couldn't have a party celebrating a ritual of a religion she wasn't a part of and wouldn't be partaking in. when she had done nothing but talk crap about me for being in that religion for the last few months. I still remember my mother picking me up that day, listening to her bray in the parking lot. One of my good friends got a brand new Audi R8 for his 16th birthday. It matched his dad's. He got all peeved and huffy because it wasn't the right V10 or something like that. Still good friends with him though. We go to LA some weekends. His treat, of course. I didn't go to a massively pricey private school. Most of the kids there were from middle-class families who spent most of their money sending their kid to my school because the other options were just so bad. But there were exceptions. We had 5 math sets and I was in the top 1. One day, one of the rich kids decides it would be funny to blow his nose in a 20-pound note and tosses it in a bin. A teacher sees this and flips out. He says if the kid ever does anything in that vein again, he'll move him to the bottom set. Now, about 3 weeks passed and the moron does it again. The teacher wasn't bluffing and kicks him down 4 classes. Being in set 5 compared to 1 was like walking into a room filled with Peter Griffins. After 1 class, the kid comes back blubbering to the teacher, just as we were all leaving to beg to get back into the class. It was like chicken soup for my middle-class soul. I was happy for weeks. This is just literally a complete disregard for money. Isn't it also illegal in some places to throw away or destroy currency? I knew a kid back in 4th grade. He was a little demon of a tyke, real jerk to everyone and would lord himself over you in just about any conceivable way possible to get you to do his bidding. One day, some girl stood up to him and refused to do something. I forget what, it's been years. And he started yelling and screaming about how his big shot lawyer daddy was gonna sue her family for everything her family had. Come to find out, kid's been trying this with other kids and they all come to her defense. He turned bright red, like cherry red, and started screaming about how this whole school wanted to bring him down, and that he deserved everything that we all had. Really going to town on being an entitled brat. Ultimately, we found out that she'd forgotten to bring him his pencil he'd lent her after a class, and that's what started all the chaos. She forgot a pencil. Apparently, that was one expensive or one special pencil, cause he never shut up about it the rest of the semester, and would constantly harass and bully this poor girl over it. Kid wound up getting pulled out of school cause the bullying was so bad, and this little brat went around for the next year saying that he had her removed from the school, and his daddy was the one who had her parents remove her, saying she was worthless. He was expelled 2 years later from the same school. I wasn't there anymore, but apparently he'd brought a gun to school to try and show off how tough he really was. This one kid on his 16th birthday received a beautiful new Rolex. It was gold with a blue ring. Stunning watch. Apparently, this wasn't the color he was looking for, so he threw it over the school fence into the adjacent river. What followed can only be described as throwing a foot-long steak sub into a nest of hungry African kids. About 12 younger kids scrambled to retrieve this watch. From what I remember, his parents bought him a new watch. The right color this time, of course. Don't the parents of these children realize they're not doing them any kind of favors here? You're raising your kid to be a horrible person. Redditors who rage quit a job without thinking, what was the last straw? I worked as a painter for a franchisee of a student painting company, and he kept telling me that he would pay me next week. This went on for about 6 weeks, and the final straw was when I had finished several large projects that would give him ample money to pay me, but he decided to hire on another person instead of paying me for all the work I had already done, like $1,300 worth of work. Then he tried negotiating down what he thought he should be paying me, despite already agreeing in writing what I would be getting paid right from the get-go. I was so mad that I didn't give him notice or even show up for the next day of work, because I had bills to pay and needed to make as much money as possible during the summer. I wrote him off as a lost cause and took him to small claims court for what he owed me and eventually got my money through the court. It was still a real pain though, and as far as I know, he's still working there full time. How's your boss gonna try and negotiate your pay after there's already been a signed contract? I've never heard of that before. After working 37 years, I requested a leave from work to care for my partner who was dying of cancer. I had 8 weeks of paid time off and was denied the request, so I quit to care for him in his last month of life. That's just heartless. How are you not gonna give someone that time off? If ever there was a reason to give them time off, that is the time. And after 37 years of working there too. It's just insulting. I was working at a call center. My shift started at 10, and I badged into the building at about 9:55 and logged on. But the decrepit PC I was using took so long to boot up that when I finally logged in, I was 15 seconds late. I told my supervisor, and he said that there's nothing he can do. And since I was late, I was put on probation and wouldn't be eligible for a raise for another month. And that I should arrive 15 minutes early so that situation won't happen again. I handed him my headset, walked out, and have never worked in a call center since. I needed a summer job while I was in high school, so I applied at a local grocery store to bag, stock, and clean. My first day there was some sort of confusion as to what I was supposed to do, or to whom I was to report. I was sent to the front counter, where the customer service manager gave me a till and told me to open a register. Mind you, I'd had zero training on a register. I didn't even know how to put the till in. I told the lady this and was told to go do my job. Within about 2 minutes at the register, there was a line several deep, and I'm just standing there with the till in my hands. The customer service lady comes storming over asking why I had such a line, and I tried again to explain to her that I was supposed to be the stocker or whatever, and that I knew nothing about operating a register. She called me stupid in front of the customers, so I handed her the till and told her to screw off. I walked down the street in my uniform and got a job at another grocery store. It's the person's first day on the job and you've given them no training. How are you going to turn around and call them stupid? You're the stupid one for just expecting them to have this knowledge. I rage quit, or more like quietly abandoned a job in high school at a big warehouse clothing shop because I was hired to work stock items and the manager decided to put me behind the register and otherwise on the floor. I stocked items for about a month before this suddenly happened. What used to be unpacking boxes and putting stuff on shelves became walking around, constantly picking up clothes from the floor, and one day the register. It was a busy day, and our recently hired employees were like 14. So they weren't legally able to operate the register. So the manager decided to put me on. I was 16. I was shown how to do a basic transaction exactly one time, and then left with a long line of customers. I did not know what I was doing, and did maybe 20 transactions on people's credit cards that I'm sure were wrong. When lunch break came, I went to see a buddy that worked in a Blockbuster in the same mall. I decided to never come back, but then I realized I left my jacket in the break room. I had to come back after a 3-hour lunch and pretend that I just lost track of time in order to get access to the break room. Then I quietly snuck out again. I went through several interviews and started a new gig. I'd be providing call center support for Windows and maybe some Apple support. Nothing I couldn't handle. I am, after all, IT support. Heck, I even cleaned the mouse while I was trying to take the technical test. I get a start date and am told it'd be 2 weeks of training. No big deal, I can do 2 weeks of training. I show up on day 1 of training and it's support for Whirlpool washing machines and dryers. Hold the phone. What? That's right, classic bait and switch. I got up, walked over to my hiring manager and said, "I quit. You hired me for Windows support, not washing machines and dryers," and walked out. 2 weeks later, I get a call. "Hi, this is X, your manager. I'm calling to find out why you haven't come to work in 2 weeks. I guess you didn't get that memo. I quit on day 1 because your company lied to me." Got an $80 paycheck. About 7 years later, I got a letter in the mail that a class action lawsuit had been filed against the company for labor law violations. 2 months after that, I got an 8-cent check in the mail, which just made me laugh. I'm surprised that you even got a paycheck. I actually did this like 2 months ago for the first time. I'm a bartender and I was working in some crappy Mexican restaurant downtown. The tips were crap because the food was crap, so we were barely ever busy. So already I'm living in New York City making barely $400 a week, when I'm used to making more than double that. At this point, I've been there 2 months and I hate it more and more every day. Around this time, my mother gets really bad pneumonia, and due to complications, it degraded her heart. So she has to have open heart surgery to repair a valve. It's a risky procedure and my mother is touching 65. Now, let me state that staff turnover was incredibly high, because in addition to us making horrible money, the manager was a complete and utter moron, Most staff left after a month. So my mom gives me a date for her surgery. I go to my manager and give her a basic breakdown of the situation and tell her I need 4 days off from X to Y so I can be with my family. She says no problem. But just to play it safe, I send emails and texts to her confirming that I indeed do have these days off. She agrees. I think, cool, no problem. Oh boy, was I wrong. 3 days before the surgery, the schedule for the week comes out, and I'm scheduled through the entire week. I immediately go to my manager and ask what the heck is going on, because I'm not wasting away behind this moldy, rat-infested bar in the West Village while my mom has surgery. No lies, this woman has the nerve to say I didn't request it off at all. When I show her my paper trail stating that yes, I did put in a request, she says, "What difference does it make if you're there? The surgery is going to have the same outcome whether you're there or not," and starts rattling off about how I need to be a team player and I'm messing up her schedule by requesting time off and yada yada yada. Her voice fades off and I literally see red. I say nothing and go back to work. This is at 5 p.m. Happy hour and our rush starts at 8. I'm the only bartender on today. Fast forward to 8:30. My bar is slammed. I have a bunch of drink tickets from the servers and it's a mess. Total chaos. My manager comes behind the bar and instead of offering any assistance, she tells me not to bring any home drama to work. I just stare at her in disbelief for a moment, truly stunned that such a tone-deaf moron could possibly be in charge of anything. I laughed in her stupid face and walked right out of the door and went to go see my mom. P.S. My mom made a full recovery. I was 21 working at UPS, was a truck loader the first year, became the fastest worker in the warehouse just because I like working quickly. Only wanted to become a supervisor because my manager was really easy to work with and always wanted to help with solutions to problems. Once they promoted me to supervisor, they transferred my manager to a different warehouse and didn't say why. Worked as a supervisor for a year, and once peak season arrived, mid-November, early January, things were getting crazy, and my manager was just a yes man to his boss. Never helped solve issues, just said figure it out or get it done. Well, in November, my best friend and I had won a World Series of Beer Pong satellite tourney to get a free entry and stay at the Flamingo in Vegas for the tournament worth $600. The tournament was from January 1st to 5th. Well, peak season is nearly impossible to get time off, and I looked at this tournament as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity with my best friend. Things were just getting so crazy, and they weren't approving any vacation requests. I wasn't getting assistance from my boss with the workload, so I just said screw it, I'm out. Come to find out, my manager, his boss, and 4 other managers got fired for changing time cards to make their production numbers look better. Which I found out is why they shipped my cool manager away, because he wouldn't participate in the dirty deeds. My best friend and I placed 46th out of 500 teams. It's one of the best memories I have to this day. No regrets. I used to work as a housekeeper at a really shady hotel. Wasn't the best job in the world, but the pay actually wasn't that bad. The owner and his wife were horrible to everyone, especially the housekeepers. I eventually worked my way to being the head housekeeper, but they kept referring to me as a maid. I don't know why that bothered me so much, but it did. Anyway, the rodeo was in town and we were really busy. I had every single room to clean, and none of my other housekeepers were showing up for work. So I asked my boss where they were, and he said he gave them the day off. They're young and have stuff to do. They were all high schoolers and I was 19 at the time. It was summer, so he decided he wanted them to go out and have fun and leave the 65 rooms to me. I was already mad at that, but then it got worse. I get to about my 15th room and I'm already exhausted. I just want to get one more done so I can take a break. I knock on the door and there's no answer. So I let myself in to see a man standing naked in the doorway. I apologize and try to leave when he calls me back. He said he wanted me to clean the room. I told him I couldn't while he was still there, and certainly not while he was naked. He said I had to do it. He was a guest. I go to my boss and explain why I wasn't cleaning that room. He told me I had to do what the customer said. If he wanted to be naked and in the room while I cleaned, then that's what had to happen. I threw my cleaning rag at him, told him to screw off, and left the rest of the rooms to him. I worked as a stock boy in the back of Hollister. Clothing retail for those unaware. Never really had any interaction with customers, but was still forced to buy their clothes to wear to work. They had all these rules about hairstyles, fingernails, and facial hair. One night, I came in to start a shift at 2:30 a.m. to do a floor change, so middle of the night, and the shift would end around the time the store opened up. I had the slightest bit of stubble on my face, like a day and a half's worth of stubble. My manager at 4 a.m. told me she had a problem with my facial hair, and that when the mall opened up, I better go buy a razor and shave before anyone saw me like that, or she'd have to send me home for the night. I basically said, well, lucky for me, I was planning on quitting anyways. Good luck with the floor change, and walked out. Went and got a biscuit breakfast, went home and got in bed. I understand that there's rules and etiquette that you have to follow at any given job, but there also needs to be some leeway given by the managers in reasonable situations. I think this would qualify. The boss not doing payroll before leaving on a business trip and leaving it to the poor office manager to tell people they weren't going to get paid on time. I walked out of a staff meeting saying I'd be back when the paychecks arrived. By the time I got home, I was mad enough to call my ops manager back and quit. Why didn't the boss do payroll? The stated answer was printer toner cartridge at home was empty. Guess he'd never heard of writing checks with a pen. Yeah, my printer ink is low, so y'all don't get paid. Okay, bye. That's such a jerk move. Earlier in my career in residential HVAC, I thought it'd be a good idea to branch out a little, to add some tools to my tool bag, so to speak. So I took a position as a lead installer at a smaller company. It wasn't particularly bad, it just wasn't in my wheelhouse, and I grew to dislike installing and tried to shift back over to the service department. My manager knew I wanted to transfer, but wouldn't let me despite my prior experience, and instead hired another tech. Now, part of the reason I didn't want to do install anymore was because of the salesmen. They were idiots. The concept of a tape measure was completely lost on them, and there were times they'd overpromise at the expense of me and my assistant. One day in particular, the residential salesman had us install the wrong type of evaporator coil, that's the thing that makes cold happen, in an attic without taking any proper measurements beforehand. It didn't fit between the joists, and when I asked for someone to come help, I was told to use your imagination. We managed to get it done, sort of, but at 5:30 it literally fell apart. I was apologetic, called the salesman and unloaded on him. We hacked it together just enough and we left. The next day at the shop, the salesman tried talking to me and I quit on the spot. He said that we had a meeting with a Lennox rep and to reconsider and please just think about it. He must have thought I'd agreed because when I went to turn in my timesheet in the meeting room, he began to introduce me as the lead installer and service tech when it's slow. So I look at him and reply, "Psh, I was," and walked out. I feel like this kind of thing probably happens a lot in this kind of industry, where the salesman is just trying to make a sale and they'll kick up the price as much as they possibly can because they're getting a commission off it, not really thinking or caring whether or not the installer can actually do the job. My first job at aircraft maintenance was for a grumpy old dirtbag. I was a completely green apprentice fresh out of school, and the old guy had no understanding of what his obligations were when taking on an apprentice, and expected me to just know everything already. He'd send me to do jobs unsupervised, wouldn't provide any instruction or guidance, then get upset if I messed something up. He chewed me out for taking too long to do stuff. He'd occasionally call me into his office and quiz me on random crap, then belittle me for not having all the answers, telling me he was going to phone up his buddies at the college and tell them how disappointed he was with the quality of their graduates. The guy was a total hypocrite too. He didn't have current manuals for any of the aircraft, didn't properly track parts and hardware, he literally had a room full of spare parts with no history, and took all kinds of shortcuts. One time during a windscreen replacement, rather than measuring out the hardener for a sealant, he eyeballed it. It was supposed to set up in a couple hours, but it hadn't hardened after 3 days, so he made me paint over it. We were supposed to cut open and inspect every oil filter we replaced, looking for metal that would indicate a failing engine. He'd store all the old oil filters on a giant workbench without labeling them, and after a year or two, go inspect them all at once. If any had metal, there was no way of knowing which aircraft it came from. He got away with being bad at his job because the Transport Canada inspector responsible for audits in that area was a friend of his. And he'd boast about how audits consisted of them talking over donuts in the break room for 3 days. Anyway, it was the last day of my probation, and he called me into his office to tell me he had a very difficult decision about whether to keep me on. I told him I'd make it easy for him and quit on the spot. As a former aircraft maintenance mechanic, this literally made me wince. I honestly didn't think in this day and age, with the amount of regulation and monitoring, places like that could still exist. I hope that dude gets what he deserves, cause he'll kill people. I worked on a farm throughout high school for a very wealthy couple. The husband was a successful commercial real estate agent, and the wife trained dogs to do hunt and field tests. I primarily worked for the wife, assisting in training the dogs, but as it was a farm, I did various things for the husband as well. The husband was a raging alcoholic who would get angry if you didn't share a drink with him when offered. When his wife was out of town participating in competitions with the dogs, I would have to drive over to the farm multiple times a day to feed the horses, clean out their stalls, etc. And I would often run into him, but I tried to avoid it when possible, because he made me uncomfortable. Anyway, I was like 17 and it was summer, so I accidentally slept through my 6 a.m. alarms one morning, and I didn't get to the farm until around 8 to feed the horses and clean out their stalls. Not like it mattered, the horses can't tell time. The husband was there and had already been drinking, as I could smell it on him. And he started laying into me about being so late. He told me I was a poor white trash piece of garbage, and if my parents let me oversleep for my job, then they're even worse white trash pieces of garbage, and I won't ever amount to anything just like them, yada yada yada. I told him he could rake up the horse poop himself, and that I quit. And as I was leaving, he was yelling at the top of his lungs that he would find me and kill me. I never went back. When I was in between jobs, I applied to work a construction job that needed harness-trained people. I was just coming off working as a solar installer, so I figured I'd give it a shot. First day on the job, they take me up to the top of their scaffolding section to clamp down beams. No biggie. I ask where their walkboards or scaffolding walks are for this floor, because all the other floors have walkways, whereas this one is just 1-inch beam, 3-foot gap, 1-inch beam all the way across, 100+ feet in the air. They tell me they don't have any. Okay, I guess I'll deal. After a few hours of grueling work, I depleted my gallon jug of water and was getting dizzy. I called down to the elevator operator to bring me down. Without missing a beat, he shouts, "Climb!" and walks off to smoke a cigarette. I climbed down all 14 or so stories on angled beams with no harness, while bordering on heat exhaustion. I walked up to the foreman, told him he was going to kill someone and it wasn't going to be me. Then I left. I worked at Best Buy in the mid-thousands. I started as a cashier and eventually made my way to the customer service booth, which was something you had to earn. One day, it was a bit busier than usual, and I was in the booth with another girl who was a notoriously lazy person. The boss asked her to jump on a register to clear out a line, and she said no. So the boss asked me, and I also said no, because I was already given another task. The next day, they pulled me into the office and told me I was demoted because of it. I walked right to my locker, grabbed my stuff, and left. Turns out, the other girl was sleeping with the boss, and that's why she was allowed to say no, but I couldn't. Sleeping with the boss aside, shouldn't you get some kind of warning or talking to about this instead of just an immediate demotion for something like that? Also, you weren't able to do it because you were busy working on something else. Otherwise, you might have been willing to help out and jump in. Teachers of Reddit, what's the most delusional thing you've seen a parent do? I work in a daycare, and for 3 months, this one dad would come in and yell at us that his kid wasn't potty trained yet. The kicker of the entire thing was that his kid wasn't even 2. I used to teach children's art classes. One girl turned up and shyly said hi to me. Her mom got cross with her and sternly made her go back outside so that she could re-enter the room and make an impression. The girl came back and gave me a nice big fake smile and wave and loudly said hello. The mother also spent way too much time making sure I realized that they lived in a very rich suburb and went to a very elite private school. I just feel bad for the kid having to deal with a mom like that. I'm not a teacher, but I'm sure if the teacher in question was a Redditor, my story would be here. My primary school taught Chinese. My mom has very strong opinions towards Asians, so much so that she refused to let me participate in these lessons. The school said they weren't going to employ someone to sit in a classroom and supervise me while all the other students had the Chinese lesson. So my mom did it. Once a week throughout grades 1 to 7, all my classmates would go to another classroom for their lesson, while I would stay in my classroom with no one but my mom. Did she really not have anything better to do? There's no way my daughter plagiarized. She didn't copy and paste it. She printed it out and retyped every word. That's still never mind. First day of my mom's kindergarten class in 90s Orange County, a parent says to my mom, "My child is going to Harvard. What are you going to do to get him there?" Those are some high expectations for a kindergarten teacher. The parent of a high school student who constantly disrespected me and acted up in class believed that if he sat in during my class, his daughter would behave. The father and daughter got into an argument during class and were both asked to leave because they were interrupting the lesson. Great, now there's 2 of them. Let their kids skip more than a third of the school days, never answered or returned a single call, nor showed up for a single parent conference, and then claimed that I should be fired for being a bad teacher when their kid failed. Another teacher I work with has a kid who refuses to come to class or participate unless her parents buy her something each week. The parent always gives in to the bribe, every week, and the kid still sometimes refuses to do anything anyway. My mom is a principal in a not very nice area and has to deal with some pretty rough parents. A couple of months ago, some girl beat the crap out of another girl in the cafeteria. When my mom brought her down to the office, she threatened to fight my mom. So my mom called her mom. Her mom then came in and also threatened to fight her. No fighting occurred. Police were called though. Gee, I wonder where she gets it. I was a para in a special ed classroom. We had one boy with autism who was 9 years old. His mom told me one day that it hurts him to poop in the toilet. She would let him poop in his pants. Then she would put the poop in the toilet and his underwear in a bucket of bleach water. He used the bathroom by himself no problem all the time at school. He was clearly not in pain pooping on the toilet. What? Why is this mom being so extra? I worked for a socialization program for children with special needs. I had a mother of a fantastic young boy with severe autism and no verbal skills full out argue publicly with my boss that he needed to be moved to a class with the highest functioning kids. She told us her baby had nothing wrong with him. He's a wonderful kid, but he couldn't handle that much stimuli. He clearly struggled to be able to communicate. I think a fair amount of parents whose children have special needs are really in denial and to the detriment of their children's development. We all get blamed for the student's bad grades. Kid had 30 missing assignments. Of course, it's the teacher's fault he's failing the class. Very annoying. Yeah, that's gotta be like the default, right? I'm sure you guys get that all the time. I used to be a high school teacher's assistant during the summer. These summer classes were usually taken by students who failed them the first time around. One mother comes up to me at the end of the semester demanding to know how her daughter had failed math a second time. I told her it was because she spent so much of her time socializing and texting on her phone during class, at which point the mom exploded saying that I was lying because her daughter didn't even have a phone, and that I was grading unfairly and that her daughter shouldn't be having such a hard time with math. Turns out the daughter had bought a cell phone off a friend and got a pay-as-you-go contract behind her mother's back after she got her phone taken away the first time she failed math. At a statewide convention for middle schoolers that included a talent show, basically a bunch of middle school kids from mostly rural areas doing magic tricks, singing, playing an instrument, signing a song in sign language, and stuff like that. The mother tells her daughter that there might be talent scouts there. The daughter freaks out and bombs her talent. Seriously? What talent scout hits up middle school talent shows? I feel like this would be like a mom from Toddlers and Tiaras or something. A boy took a picture of a special needs girl's butt because her jeans rode down a bit. He passed the picture around the school, which resulted in lots of bullying directed toward the girl. When the boy was suspended, his father appealed the suspension, blamed the school for targeting his child, and threatened to sue. This resulted in the best line I've ever heard from a school principal. "Fine, the moment I hear from your lawyer is the moment you'll be reading the charges I'll be filing on your son." Yeah, Dad, don't push it. Your son's getting off pretty light here considering. My mom is a special education teacher. She's seen numerous parents try to force their kids into special education classes just because they wanted the disability check that comes with it. It's absolutely disgusting. I was working with a class of gifted high school students taking a summer course. During a field trip, one of my students needed to go to a doctor's appointment and would be picked up early by her parents. The only way to contact the group on the field trip was my cell phone, so the parents got my personal number. In the week left in the summer course, I received 23 text messages and 15 calls asking why their 10th grade daughter had not called them back. What? Why do you have anything to do with that? Principal here had a kid who was gifted and who almost died at birth. Mom felt super guilty, and as a result, she wouldn't dare do or say anything to upset him. So the kid ran the show. The kid got other kids and teachers in trouble by lying, then would tell his mom some story and she would come sailing in to his defense. Even said things like her son would never lie. Anyway, the year in my school was a gong show. After that year, the kid convinced his mother that the whole school was full of bullies, mean teachers, and an incompetent principal. They withdrew him and put him in a private school. Good move. I caught a girl cheating by writing formulas on her hand. She told the dean and her mother that that was how she studied, and she'd forgotten to wash it off. Mom believed her and set up a conference with me to explain. The dean did not, and she got a Saturday school. Think Breakfast Club. Dance teacher here. I had a parent pull her 3-year-old daughter out of a dancing concert, which she had paid roughly $300 in performing costs and $250 in tuition, all because her child's class were cast as the mice from Cinderella and not as the mermaids from The Little Mermaid. The mouse costumes were beautiful pink and gray glitter tutus and were classed as the cutest performance of the night. After she heard the reviews, she tried to get us to stage the concert again so her daughter could perform. Talk about a world revolves around me concept. My mother was a lunch lady when I was in kindergarten, and there was a girl who was morbidly obese in my class. She couldn't walk from the classroom to the lunchroom without getting sick from the physical activity. My mom and some of the other lunch ladies started tweaking the menu when she got in line to have the healthier options out for her to eat. Her mother caught wind of this and started packing her lunch, always with cookies and Twinkies and soda. I don't know how as a parent you can allow your child to live like that, to encourage it. I'm not saying don't give your kids treats, but how do you let it get to that point? If it's kindergarten and this is already an issue, then yeah, there's a problem that you need to address. Mom, you're not helping anything. You're actively making the process worse and getting in the way of those who are trying to help and care about your child's health. I was a student, but dealt with a crazy parent. Mom of a classmate complained that I missed over 50% of the class and received an A, but their kid who only missed one day failed. She tried to get me suspended when she saw that her son wasn't going to be passed. I had to go to a parent-teacher conference consisting of my classmate, his mom, me, and the admins for 2 whole weeks during lunches to try and explain to this lady that I wasn't going to be failed. I teach elementary French, and as a treat at the end of the month, the kids get to watch a little bit of a movie in French. So I sent home a notice to parents to let them know this was the plan, and give them an idea of some of the shows I was thinking about. One of them was Beauty and the Beast. Shortly after I sent this notice home, one of the parents emailed me to tell me why they were fine with most of the choices, but didn't want their daughter watching Beauty and the Beast. There was no explanation for why. I've been told by the other teachers that this girl's parents are kind of bizarre, and have heard a couple of stories in the few months I've been there. They're a highly religious family, and don't want their children exposed to anything they deem inappropriate. What's inappropriate about Beauty and the Beast? Are you going to turn around and say that all the furniture moving around and having life is ungodlike or something? I don't understand your argument here. I saw a parent rip an evolution poster from the wall, claiming that it impacted her religious freedom. I had no idea evolution and religion are in a battle to the death. My first parent conference in 2005. The mom brings a large cardboard box full of hand lotion and a doctor's note for her student. The doctor's note states that the student is to use the restroom each class period as needed. The large cardboard box full of hand lotion is for the son's insatiable desire to take care of himself. 6 months into my first year teaching, this kid asks to use the restroom. I allow him, and while he's in the restroom, he scales a 10-foot cinder block wall into the ceiling tiles and tries to cross over to the women's restroom. He uses a pencil to poke holes into the ceiling tiles so he can peek into the women's restroom stalls. Eventually, his weight caused him to fall through the tiles and he impacts the support walls of 2 stalls. The end result? Broken clavicle and humerus, separated shoulder, torn ligaments in knee, and severe concussion. After the incident, the student was expelled from school and enrolled in outdoor programs. What kind of doctor gives your kid a note for that? I'm still in student teaching, but when I was in high school, students could rent a MacBook for the school year. You filled out a contract and weren't allowed to replace certain parts or install certain things. Naturally, one kid I was acquainted with who constantly bragged about getting around the rules got caught and was to have his school-issued laptop revoked for the rest of the school year, as well as be suspended for a short amount of time. His mom stormed in, made the assistant principal cry in her surrounded by windows office, and the kid showed up 2 days later with his laptop back. It wasn't a question if the kid could afford a laptop without the school's reduced rental price. He had numerous desktop computers and a personal laptop. Honestly, this story just makes me feel bad for the assistant principal. Some parents can just be the worst when it comes to their kid. One time, a kid got into a fight with another kid in the hallway. He got this kid on the ground and started kicking the crap out of him. As he was kicking, his sneaker flew off and got stuck in the ceiling tiles. As I'm leaving school for the day, he's standing with his mother in the front office, and she's screaming at the poor principal because her son only had 1 shoe. What, does she think the principal confiscated 1 shoe? A couple hired me to teach their 13-year-old overweight daughter to ride a bike, a deal to which she only agreed if they bought her a $450 bike. They did. During the lesson, she sat down and pouted and refused to do anything. I still got paid. Special education teacher here. A parent recently told me that they believe their son shouldn't be sped by middle school if I'm doing my job right. Their son is nonverbal and severely autistic. It just made me sad. I think this comes back to one of our previous posters' comments about some of these parents just being in denial, unfortunately. I teach in Japan, and in Japan, a parent has to voluntarily put their child in special needs classes. If they don't, the student must take normal classes with every other student. I can't tell you how many times I've seen children with severe learning disabilities be forced to sit in a normal class they can't understand, all because a parent is in denial or ashamed that their child isn't normal. Ugh, sounds like we're gonna have a lot of these, aren't we? My wife teaches, and I'm her assistant. I help with grading papers, posting grades, classroom help with computers. She teaches special ed, mostly with inner-city children who have never been able to learn to read. She can teach anyone to read. 3 years ago, she was working with a boy who was in 7th grade and unable to read. After a few months, she got him up to 3rd grade level. Then his mom came to the school very angry. "You gotta stop this or I'm gonna lose his learning disability check if they find out he can read. Mind your own damn business." Oh my god, is this really that popular of a thing? Right now, parents think excused absences means the student doesn't have to make up work. I've had 4 parents call me in the past week calling me out for their kids' grades being lowered, all because they didn't do the makeup work and got a 0. Their only argument is, well, it's an excused absence. Preschool teacher here. One year, I had a set of twins with some serious behavioral problems. They wouldn't do anything we wanted them to. They participated in nothing and did only what they wanted to do when they wanted to do it. Cleanup time? My dad says that I shouldn't have to clean up because I'm not a girl. WTF? Did he really just say that? Yes, every single class. There were many conferences with the parents. The dad insisted the kids were fine and they could do what they wanted. We'd explain that in order for us to teach them anything, including how to behave appropriately in a classroom setting before kindergarten next year, he'd have to tell them to listen to us. But he felt that his 4-year-old boys shouldn't listen to any woman, including their own mother, who had so little control over them that she never took them out of the house, which she reported they had completely destroyed. Their behavior was so terrible that we assumed they were on the spectrum before we spoke with their dad. And maybe they were, but mostly, they've been raised to believe that women are never in a position of authority. And the worst part? They had a younger boy and another on the way. That poor woman. Her husband had completely hobbled her ability to raise them while leaving her to raise them alone while he worked. They told the director they were moving back to the Middle East just before she kicked them out for being utterly unmanageable. Oh, it really sounds like this father's raising these kids to be a couple of little hellions. I had a parent ask what I taught the kids about Martin Luther King Day because his kid came home and said that white people hate black people. Of course I didn't tell your first grader that. Racism is in the second grade curriculum. My friend is a 6th grade teacher. The way her middle school works is that she's in charge of a class of about 25 kids. She teaches them a few subjects. I know math, science, and reading and spelling. She then switches with her partner teacher to teach his kids the same subjects while he does social studies and whatever other subjects there are with her class. Not too long ago, kids in her class began to complain that things were missing from their desks. They were able to keep the things they didn't need for their lessons in the other room in their desks. Whole lunches turned up missing, all in the vicinity of this one boy. Her partner eventually caught him with something that was reported missing, and the principal made him empty his pockets. He was stealing everything. They were lenient with him, only sternly warning him not to do it anymore. The next time, they called the school security officer in to speak with him and sent a note home to his parents. The third time, they gave him in-school suspension and called his parents for a conference. His dad apparently flipped out on the phone, saying that his son did nothing wrong and that he knew what they were doing. Turns out, the boy was telling his parents that his teachers were planting the stolen items on him to get him in trouble, and his parents believed this. My poor friend is so frustrated, even though he's not technically in her class, and she's been trying to get him and his parents to speak with the social worker, but it's been to no avail. Kid sounds like an early kleptomaniac or something. A mother from the PTA offered to buy the food for the teacher luncheon during their workshop day. She went out and bought the food, and when she turned in the receipts to be reimbursed, we noticed the bottoms were torn off. It just so happens this is where the payment information is. What ended up happening is that this lady bought food with her EBT card and had the school refund her in cash for what she bought. So basically, the school was converting her EBT money into cash to spend on whatever she wanted. I once saw the parents of a football player have a stern talk with the coach because his son wasn't the starting inside linebacker. Part of what made it delusional is that his son was starting at outside linebacker, so he was already getting more playing time than the 30 or so other players that didn't have a starting role. What made it even more delusional was that the guy's son was essentially playing inside linebacker anyways. We ran a 40 base defense under the look of a 4-3 defense. That means that before every play, our strong safety moves into the outside linebacker role, and one of the outside linebackers becomes an inside linebacker. I don't know football at all, but it sounds like this dad already had what he wanted. I had an undergrad student sleep through my cell biology lab classes where the majority of their project is meant to be self-motivated. As the teacher's assistant, I teach techniques, but I'm not meant to do the project for them. At the end of the semester, this kid was failing, and I got an email from his mother telling me that clearly I wasn't doing my job because her son couldn't possibly be failing my lab. I responded by recommending he get a full 8 hours of sleep a night when retaking the course the following year. Back when I was doing my practice teaching, I sat in on a parent-teacher interview between my supervising teacher and the parent of a child who had an exceptionality. The interview was fairly standard, with the teacher showing the parents a few samples of the student's work, commenting on how well the 17-year-old was getting at printing his name, and how he was doing well remembering a few details from fairy tales and the like. It was not until the parent asked the teacher what university program his child should take that I realized how clueless the parent was. The student could neither read nor write and had been in special education classes for all of his schooling. University was not in the cards for this one. While teaching first grade, I came across a girl that had already been held back in kindergarten, but was still failing in the first grade. She couldn't read, never did her homework, and never put any effort into catching up with her classmates. One day, out of the blue, she told me that if the school tried to hold her back again, her mother had told her that they would just move back to the last state they lived in. It infuriated me that even in the first grade, her mother had already instilled the idea in this little girl that she could run away from any problems, and that would be easier than putting forth any effort. The girl did move back to that other state before the year was over, and I think about how hard her life is going to be as she grows up with that mentality. Another case of the parents just not doing the child any favors. You gotta teach the kid to put in a little effort sometimes. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description as well. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.